Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. I still hear them screaming in my sleep. My buddies from Nam, their voices frozen in that final moment before the world went silent for them. But last night was different. Last night, their screams followed me into the waking world, echoing through the walls of my grandfather's cabin, except that's not possible, because the dead don't speak, or at least that's what I used to believe. My name is Mason Howell. 3 weeks ago, I got a letter saying my grandfather died and left me his cabin in the North Carolina mountains. Perfect timing, really. The VA doctors kept telling me I needed a quiet place to heal. Funny how wrong they were about the quiet part. The drive up was long and lonely, just me and Rusty, my German Shepherd mix. He's the only one who doesn't look at me like I'm broken. The road turned from pavement to gravel to dirt, winding deeper into the mountains until my truck's headlights caught the outline of the cabin, a dark shadow against the evening sky. "Home sweet home, boy," I told Rusty as we stepped out. The air felt heavy here, like it was holding its breath. I noticed right away how my voice sounded wrong, like the echo came back a beat too late and from the wrong direction. I didn't know my grandfather. Mom never talked about him, said he was touched in the head. Looking at this place, the sagging porch, boarded windows, and faded no trespassing signs nailed to nearby trees, I could see why people might think that. We spent that first night on the floor, me staring at the ceiling, Rusty pressed against my side. Around midnight, I heard someone whistle from the tree line. 3 notes, the same signal we used in the jungle to locate each other after dark. I bolted upright, heart hammering. "Who's there?" I called out, grabbing the flashlight next to my sleeping bag. The beam cut through darkness, but showed nothing. Then I heard it again, the same 3 notes, but now from a different direction. The sound was crystal clear, like whoever was whistling stood right next to my ear. Rusty growled, hackles rising. I reached for the revolver in my duffel. War taught me never to ignore warning signs. "Show yourself," I shouted, and the strangest thing happened. My words echoed back perfectly, but with a question mark at the end. Show yourself? Not an echo, a question. The next morning, I drove into town for supplies. The general store was like stepping back. In time, wooden floors, potbelly stove, and an old man at the counter who introduced himself as Walter Pritchard. "Howell's grandson, are you?" he asked, eyeing me up and down. "Thought you might show up eventually." "You knew my grandfather?" Walter's face tightened. Everybody knew Elliot Howell. Man kept to himself, but... He trailed off, busying himself with my groceries. "But what?" He hesitated, then leaned forward. "Listen, son, that valley ain't right. Sound does strange things up there. My advice? Stay quiet after sundown. Don't call out to nothing you hear. And if that old cabin starts feeling wrong, you don't tough it out. You leave." I laughed it off. Another superstitious local, I figured. But as I was loading supplies, Walter pressed a box of shotgun shells into my hand. "On the house," he said. "Your grandfather never left home without protection. Neither should you." Back at the cabin, I found a trap door under a worn rug in the living room. It led to a cellar where boxes of my grandfather's belongings gathered dust. In one, I found leather-bound journals filled with cramped handwriting and strange diagrams about acoustic anomalies and vocal signatures. The pages were filled with coordinates, times of day, and descriptions of sounds that made no sense. Children. Laughing 47 seconds, harmonic distortion in upper register, and Creekwater reversed playback contains words. I brushed it off as the ramblings of an eccentric old man until sunset came, and I heard my own voice calling from the woods. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" It was my voice. with my slight southern drawl, but I hadn't said a word. Rusty went crazy, barking and throwing himself against the window facing the trees. When I looked out, I saw nothing but lengthening shadows. But the voice came again, my voice. "Hello? Rusty, did you hear that?" Perfect mimicry of something I'd said earlier that day. The wind picked up, carrying more fragments of my own voice from different directions. I slammed the shutters closed and double-checked the locks. In the sudden quiet of the cabin, I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, and something else, a faint rhythmic scratching from inside the walls. My first week passed in a blur of strange incidents. I explored the surrounding forest, finding bizarre arrangements of animal bones that formed what looked like primitive amplifiers, skulls positioned at precise angles to direct sound waves, jawbones strung up like wind chimes. The locals avoided my questions, changing the subject or suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. Then came the storm. 3 days of relentless rain that turned the dirt road into flowing mud. The radio announced that bridges were out across the county. I was cut off. The night the power failed, everything changed. Without the hum of electricity, the cabin fell into a silence so complete it had weight. I lit candles and tried to read one of my grandfather's journals by flashlight. But the scratching in the walls had gotten louder. I was trapped in this valley with something that could steal my voice. And now it had me exactly where it wanted me, alone in the dark. That first night without power was the longest of my life. The darkness felt alive, watching me. I huddled with Rusty near the fireplace, feeding it the last dry logs I could find. The storm howled outside, rain hammering the roof like bullets on a tin can. Around midnight, the voices started. "Mason, check your 6." It was Diaz, my squad leader. The same words he'd said moments before stepping on a mine. But Diaz was dead, 6,000 miles away, and 3 years ago. "Ignore it," I whispered to myself, gripping Rusty's fur. "It's not real." But Rusty heard it too. His ears perked up, head tilting toward the sound. Then came Johnson's laugh, that stupid snorting chuckle that used to drive us crazy during night watch. It floated through the cabin clear as day, moving from one room to another. I followed it to my grandfather's bedroom, flashlight shaking in my hand. The sound led me to a dusty bookshelf that looked wrong somehow. Pushing against its side, I discovered it was a door to a hidden room. Inside was an audio lab that would make the army jealous. Reel-to-reel recorders, mixing boards, microphones, and equipment I couldn't name. The walls were covered with foam soundproofing panels and shelves lined with hundreds of labeled tapes. Day 341. Twilight recording. Subject responds to emotional stimuli. Day 478. First coherent mimicry. Caution advised, and dozens marked simply feeding session, with dates going back 30 years. In the center sat a desk with my grandfather's journal open to a page with a single line. "It prefers the sounds of fear." I picked a tape labeled First Contact and loaded it into a player. My grandfather's voice crackled through the speakers. "Elliot Howell, July 17th, 1932. I've been tracking the sound anomalies in the valley for 6 months now. Today I'll attempt direct communication." There was silence, then my grandfather whistling, 3 notes, the exact same signal I heard my first night. After a pause, the 3 notes returned from the recording, perfect but somehow wrong, like hearing your voice. On tape, but worse. "It's mimicking me," my grandfather's voice said, excited. "Now for the test." He recited numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The reply came, 1, 2, 3, 4, death. The tape hissed with silence. "My God," my grandfather finally whispered, "it's learning." I shut it off, my hands shaking. On another shelf behind glass sat a row of jars. Inside each floated what looked like strips of pale meat. The label on one made me gag. Vocal cords, J. Murphy Hunter, 1951. My Grandfather wasn't just studying this thing, he was feeding it. The next morning, I tried the radio again, nothing but static. I needed to get out of this place, storm or no storm. I packed quickly, called for Rusty, and headed for my truck. The engine turned over, but died instantly. Under the hood, I found wires chewed clean through. It would take days to fix without parts. "Fine," I said out loud. "We walk." I grabbed my pack, water, and my grandfather's revolver. Rusty seemed happy to leave, trotting ahead as we started down the muddy road. After an hour of walking, something felt wrong. The trees looked familiar, too familiar. "Wait," I said, stopping to look around. There was the crooked pine I'd passed earlier, and the rock shaped like a turtle. We'd walked in a complete circle. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun wildly, never settling. I tried following the sun instead, but the clouds were too thick to see it. By afternoon, after 3 more attempts to leave, I was back at the cabin. Somehow every path led back here. The valley wouldn't let me go. That night, Rusty wouldn't stop pacing. He kept staring at the corners of the room, growling at nothing. Around sunset, he suddenly froze, staring at the window. His ears flattened. Against his head, outside, something moved at the edge of the trees. Too tall to be a man, too thin to be a bear. Its head looked wrong, stretched out like a deer skull. But deer don't stand on 2 legs, and they don't have hands. It was gone in a blink, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. But Rusty's behavior told me it was real. He wouldn't leave my side all night, trembling whenever the wind blew. I returned to my grandfather's hidden room, searching for answers. One journal caught my eye, newer than the others, its pages filled with drawings of what he called the Wendigo. "It feeds on fear," he wrote. "First your voice, then your terror, finally your flesh. The locals know. They've always known. We made a deal generations ago. Feed it recordings of pain, and it leaves the town alone. I've improved the method, using technology to capture pure sound signatures of trauma. The emotional resonance satisfies it longer than simple fear. The last entry sent ice through my veins. It's growing stronger. The recordings aren't enough anymore. Pritchard says I need to uphold my end of the bargain. God forgive me for what I must do. A knock at the door made me jump. Through the peephole, I saw Walter Pritchard, soaked from the rain. "We need to talk, son," he said. "About your grandfather, about the bargain." I let him in, keeping the revolver close. Walter pulled at his feet as he looked around the cabin, nodding as if confirming something to himself. "You found his equipment, then?" "How did you know about that?" Walter sighed, suddenly looking very old. "Because I helped him build it. We've been keeping the Wendigo fed for 50 years. "The what?" "Wendigo, old spirit that lives in these mountains, feeds on sound, especially the sounds of suffering. Your grandfather found a way to satisfy it without giving it fresh victims. Those jars with the vocal cords," Walter nodded grimly, "from those who came before we understood what it wanted." He looked me straight in the eye. "Your grandfather sacrificed himself to it, you know, his final offering. Why are you telling me this? Because the storm destroyed our equipment in town. The backup system. We need yours now." He pointed to the hidden room. "The Wendigo needs feeding, and you're the only howl left. It's your responsibility now." Outside, something let out a cry that was half animal, half human scream. Rusty went, wild, barking and scratching at the door. Walter's eyes widened with fear. "It's hungry," he whispered, "and it knows you're here." I couldn't sleep that night after Walter left. His words kept spinning in my head. My grandfather had sacrificed himself to this thing, and now Walter expected me to take his place, feeding recorded pain to a monster. "I didn't ask for any of this," I told Rusty, who lay tense beside me, his eyes fixed on the door. Around 3 a.m. I heard my mother's voice. "Mason, sweetie, come outside and play." I froze. My mother died when I was 2. I had no memory of her voice. No recordings? Nothing? Mason, the voice called again, soft and sweet. Don't you want to see me? That's not possible, I whispered. I don't even know what she sounded like. But some part of me wanted to open that door, to see if somehow, impossibly, she was out there. Rusty sensed it too. He stood in front of me, blocking my path to the door, growling softly. Smart dog, I said, patting his head. Whatever's out there, it's not Mom. In the morning, Rusty was gone. The front door was still locked from the inside, but the doggy door at the back of the cabin stood open. I called for him until my voice gave out, but the forest swallowed my words without an echo. 3 days passed. I barely slept, jumping at every sound. The voices grew bolder, coming right up to the cabin windows at night. My war buddies, my drill. Sergeant, people I hadn't thought about in years, all calling me by name, all begging me to come outside. On the 3rd day, Rusty returned. I heard scratching at the door and flung it open to find him lying on the porch, barely able to stand. His fur had fallen out in patches. His eyes looked cloudy, unfocused. But worst of all was his bark when I picked him up. It didn't sound like Rusty anymore. It sounded human. I brought him inside, laid him on his bed and tried to get him to drink some water. He refused, watching me with those strange, milky eyes. That night, I woke to something wet dripping on my face. Rusty stood over me, but his mouth was wrong, too wide, stretched in a way dog jaws don't bend. What dripped wasn't drool. It was black, like oil. Rusty, I whispered. He opened his mouth wider, and a voice came out that wasn't a bark. It was my grandfather's voice. Feed it, Mason, or it takes what it wants. I scrambled away, falling off the bed. Rusty, or whatever was inside Rusty now, followed, moving stiffly like a puppet. The pact must be honored, my grandfather's voice continued coming from my dog's mouth. One voice freely given, or many taken by force. I ran to the hidden room and slammed the door, leaning against it as Rusty scratched and howled outside. The sound was changing, becoming less dog and more something else. The scratching wasn't coming from paws anymore. It sounded like fingers. In the early light of dawn, everything went quiet. I opened the door slowly, baseball bat in hand. Rusty lay in the hallway, looking normal again, sleeping peacefully. When he woke and saw me, his tail wagged weakly. His eyes were clear. Had I imagined it all? That afternoon, I went back to my grandfather's journals, searching for something, anything that might help. In his last notebook, I found a recording labeled "My Final Contribution." With shaking hands, I put it in the player. This is Elliot Howell. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and you've inherited my burden. My grandfather's voice sounded tired, ancient. I've fed the Wendigo for 50 years, kept it satisfied with recordings instead of lives, but it's growing stronger. It wants more than just the sounds of pain now. It wants memories, consciousness, souls. He paused, and I could hear him take a ragged breath. I've made a device. It can trap the Wendigo using its own collected voices against it. The blueprints are in the red folder. But to complete it, you need a final piece, a pure death sound, the acoustic signature of a soul leaving a body. I'm going to give it mine. Voluntary sacrifice strengthens the trap. Another pause. I'm sorry for bringing this on you, but the Wendigo has marked our family. It will never let a howl leave the valley alive. My final recording should buy you time to finish the trap. After that, his voice broke. After that, may God have mercy on us both. The tape ended with the sound of a gunshot. I found the red folder. Inside were complex diagrams for a device that looked like a cross between a radio and a record player. According to my grandfather's notes, it would create a frequency that could briefly stun the Wendigo, trapping it in a loop of its own collected voices. I started gathering the parts, working through the night. Outside, whispers grew louder. They no longer stayed in the woods. They moved inside the walls, under the floorboards, in the ceiling above my head. Around midnight, Rusty started acting strange again. He stared at nothing, hackles raised, then suddenly bolted outside through his doggy door. I called after him, but he was gone. An hour later, I heard him whimpering on the porch. When I opened the door, he attacked, lunging for my throat with a growl that wasn't animal at all. I fell backward, his weight pinning me down. Rusty's eyes weren't his anymore. They were ancient, hungry eyes looking out from my dog's face. I loved that dog. He'd been with me through the worst of my PTSD, slept beside me during the nightmares, licked away tears I wouldn't admit I'd cried. But this wasn't Rusty anymore. With a strength born of desperation, I shoved him off and scrambled for the revolver. He came at me again, mouth stretching impossibly wide, that black oil dripping onto the floor. "I'm sorry, boy," I whispered, and pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the cabin, then kept echoing long after it should have stopped. It bounced. Off the walls, multiplied, changed pitch, became almost musical. Rusty's body collapsed, but the sound of the gunshot transformed into laughter. From outside came a sound I'll never forget. Not quite animal, not quite human. A roaring howl of triumph that shook the windows and made the air itself vibrate. The Wendigo had gotten what it wanted. The sound of death, freely given by my hand. As Rusty's blood spread across the floor, I realized the truth. The Wendigo had used my dog to trick me into creating exactly what it needed, a fresh death sound. And now it was coming to collect. I buried Rusty at sunrise. My hands were raw from digging in the cold ground, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow feeling in my chest. As I patted down the last of the dirt, I heard vehicles approaching. 3 pickup trucks rumbled into view. Walter was driving the first one, with 4 men I didn't recognize in the others. They carried rifles and shotguns. Not hunting for deer, that was clear. "We heard the shot last night," Walter said as he stepped out. His face looked grim. "It's started, hasn't it? The Wendigo got to your dog," I nodded, too tired to speak. "Then it's time." Walter gestured to the men. "The pact must be renewed." The men spread out, surrounding me. One pulled rope from his truck bed. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "Your grandfather understood," Walter said softly, almost kindly. "Every 20 years the Wendigo demands a living sacrifice. Elliot found a way around it with his recordings, but after what you did last night—" "I killed my own dog," I said, anger rising. "Isn't that enough?" Walter shook his head. "The Wendigo's had a taste now. It won't stop until it gets what it wants." He nodded to the men. "It's nothing personal, son, but better one outsider than all our families." I didn't wait to hear more. I ran for the cabin, bullets kicking up dirt at my heels. I slammed the door and grabbed my grandfather's revolver, but I only had 2 bullets left. 5 men outside. Bad odds. They surrounded the cabin, calling for me to come out. I retreated to the hidden room, locking the reinforced door behind me. Through the small window, I could see them approaching the cabin carefully, like they were hunting something dangerous. Maybe they were. I grabbed my grandfather's device, still unfinished, and worked frantically to complete it. According to his notes, if I could power it with the right electrical current, it would create a sound barrier the Wendigo couldn't cross. Maybe it would work on humans too. A crash from the front room told me they'd broken in. Heavy footsteps searched the cabin. "Mason," Walter called, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Why me?" I shouted back. "Why not one of you?" "The Wendigo marked your family long ago," Walter answered, his voice closer now. "Your grandfather knew that. Why do you think he lived alone up here all those years?" "He was protecting the town. They found the hidden door. The handle jiggled. 'Stand back,' someone said. A shotgun blast splintered the wood around the lock. I aimed the revolver at the door. One more shot, and I'd be out of bullets. Then what? The door burst open. Walter stood there with his rifle, looking almost sorry. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of the others searching my grandfather's equipment. "Don't do this," I said. "We don't have a choice," he replied. Then he saw the device in my hands. "What's that?" My grandfather's trap for the Wendigo. Hope flickered across Walter's face, quickly replaced by doubt. Elliot tried for years to trap it, never worked. He figured it out at the end, I said. That's why he killed himself. His death sound was the final piece. Walter hesitated, rifle still pointed at me. Outside, the sky darkened suddenly, though it was barely noon. One of the men shouted in alarm. "It's coming!" he yelled. "Walter, we need to finish this now." Walter's finger tightened on the trigger. I closed my eyes. The shot never came. Instead, a scream tore through the air, not human, not animal. The cabin shook, something heavy thudded against the outer wall. "It's early," Walter whispered, face pale. "It never comes in daylight." More screams outside. Gunshots. Then silence. Walter's eyes met mine. Fear had replaced the determination. "Your device," he said urgently. "Will it work?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "It needs more power than the cabin's generator can give it." A wet, ripping sound came from outside, followed by a gurgle. Walter ran to the window. "Oh God," he whispered. "It's taking them." I looked past him. In the yard, something tall and thin moved among the trucks. The men were gone. Dark stains marked the ground. Walter turned to me, panic in his eyes. "Help us," he begged. "Your grandfather protected this town for 50 years. You're a Howell. It's in your blood." "Protect the people who just tried to kill me?" I asked in disbelief. "We were desperate," Walter said. "But you know what that thing is now. You know what it'll do if it gets to the town. There are children there." Through the window I saw it clearly for the first time. Impossibly tall, skin stretched tight over a skeleton too big for its frame. Its head was like a deer skull, but wrong, with too many eye sockets. Where its throat should be was a bulging sac that pulsed as it moved. It turned toward the cabin, and I swear it smiled with a mouthful of needle teeth. Walter raised his rifle with shaking hands. "Run," he told me. "I'll hold it off." "Don't shoot," I warned. "It feeds on death sounds, remember? Too late." Walter fired wildly as the thing lunged forward. The Wendigo didn't even flinch as bullets passed through it. It grabbed Walter by the throat and lifted him like he weighed nothing. I had one bullet left. I aimed carefully and fired, not at the Wendigo, but at my grandfather's gas tank by the generator. The explosion rocked the cabin, throwing me against the wall. Heat washed over me as flames engulfed the side of the building. In the confusion, I grabbed the device and ran out the back door. Behind me, Walter's scream cut off abruptly. I didn't look back. I ran deeper into the forest. The unfinished trap clutched to my chest. The Wendigo would follow. I knew that now. It had marked me, as it had marked my grandfather before me. The trees around me started to look wrong, twisted. The path I followed doubled back on itself, though I'd been running straight. The Wendigo was changing the landscape, trying to confuse me. A voice called my name, Walter's voice, though I knew he was dead. Then my mother's voice again. Then Rusty's bark. "Leave me alone," I shouted at the forest. The voices laughed, the sound coming from everywhere at once. Then they spoke in unison. Hundreds of stolen voices forming one. "You can never leave, Mason Howell. This valley is ours. You are ours." I stumbled out into a clearing and froze. Ahead of me was the cabin, the same cabin I'd just fled somehow. Intact, no sign of the explosion or fire. No sign of Walter or the other men. Even Rusty's grave was gone. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real." But it felt real. The ground under my feet, the air in my lungs. Even the weight of the device in my arms. The device, I looked down and saw it had changed too. It was complete now, dials glowing with power it shouldn't have. An illusion, I realized aloud. "You're making me see things." The forest rippled around me like a stone thrown into water. For a moment, I glimpsed reality, the burned cabin, Walter's body, the true forest. Then it snapped back to the Wendigo's version. I remembered my grandfather's notes. It can manipulate sound waves to distort physical space, That's how it kept me trapped in the valley. That's how it made me walk in circles. Sound was its weapon, but also its weakness. The device in my hands was warm now, humming with energy. Somehow, standing here in the Wendigo's illusion, it had found power. I turned the dials according to my grandfather's instructions and pressed the activation switch. A high-pitched tone cut through the air, painful to my ears. The forest wavered again, the false image breaking apart. Through the cracks, I saw the Wendigo, much closer than I'd thought, reaching for me with long, bony fingers. I turned and ran, the real world flickering in and out around me. For the first time since arriving, I knew which way was out of the valley. The device had disrupted the Wendigo's hold just enough. Behind me, a roar of rage shook the trees. The Wendigo was coming, and it was angry. I ran until my lungs burned. The device clutched tight against my chest. The forest changed around me, sometimes clear and real, sometimes twisted into impossible shapes. The Wendigo's illusions fought against my grandfather's machine. The edge of the valley was marked by a ridge of tall pines. If I could get past them, maybe the Wendigo's power would weaken. I pushed forward, legs heavy as lead, my breath coming. In ragged gasps, behind me trees snapped and cracked. It was gaining. I reached for my military radio, the one piece of equipment I never went without. An idea formed. My grandfather's notes said certain frequencies hurt the Wendigo. The radio couldn't produce sound like his device, but maybe it could broadcast the same frequency. My fingers fumbled with the dials, trying to match the settings on the device. The radio squealed with feedback, and behind me, the Wendigo screamed, in what sounded like pain. Good. I'd found a weakness. The tree line was just ahead now, maybe 50 yards. I pushed harder, though every muscle begged me to stop. Just as I reached the first pines, a voice called from right beside my ear. "Mason!" My grandfather's voice, clear as day. "Stop!" I faltered, nearly tripping. The voice was so close, so real. "You can't leave," the voice continued. "The Wendigo contains me now. It contains all of us." I shook my head, trying to clear it. "You're not my grandfather." "I am," the voice insisted. "When the Wendigo takes your voice, it takes everything, memories, thoughts, soul. I'm trapped inside it, Mason, we all are." I hesitated, looking back. Through the trees, I could see it approaching, that tall, skeletal figure with too many eyes in its deer-skull face. But now I noticed something else. Its body seemed to shift and change, like it was made of dozens of different pieces stitched together. Human shapes writhed beneath its skin. "Help us," my grandfather's voice begged. "Free us." The Wendigo was 50 feet away now. Its throat sac pulsed, and suddenly the forest filled with sound. Every voice it had ever stolen, crying out at once. The noise was deafening, disorienting. I covered my ears, but it did no good. The voices were inside my head now. Among them, clear and distinct, I heard Rusty's bark. Then my mother singing a lullaby I'd never heard before. Then my grandfather speaking words I somehow knew were true. "The trap works both ways, Mason. It can hold the Wendigo, or it can free us." I looked down at the device in my hands. 2 settings were marked on the main dial: contain and release. The Wendigo was 30 feet away, moving faster now. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, ready to consume me like it had consumed all the others. I had to choose. With shaking hands, I turned the dial to release and activated the machine. A different tone filled the air, deeper, resonant, making the ground beneath my feet vibrate. The Wendigo froze, its body convulsing. From its mouth poured a stream of light, not physical light, but something else. Sound made visible. Voices, returning to their true form. They rose into the air, hundreds of them, brief flashes of human shapes that dissolved into the sky. The Wendigo thrashed, trying to hold onto its collection of souls. Its body began to cave in on itself, the stolen flesh melting away to reveal the true creature beneath. Something ancient and starving, with too many mouths and not enough eyes. Among the escaping lights, I saw a familiar shape. Rusty, his form, briefly solid enough that I could see his tail wag one last time before he dissolved into the air. Then my mother, her face kind in a way I'd only seen in old photographs. She smiled at me before she too faded away. Last came my grandfather. His light hovered before me, taking his shape just long enough to nod. "Thank you," his voice said in my mind. "Now run!" The Wendigo let out a howl of rage and hunger as its stolen voices escaped. It fixed its gaze on me, the only source of sound left. Without its collection of voices, it looked smaller, weaker, but no less dangerous. I turned and ran for the tree line. The device in my hands grew hot, then cracked down the middle, its purpose fulfilled. Behind me, the Wendigo gave chase, but it moved slower now, more awkward without its stolen power. I reached the top of the ridge and looked back one last time. The creature stood at the edge of its territory, pacing like a caged animal. It opened its mouth and tried to speak with a voice that was now only its own, a dry, crackling sound like dead leaves in wind. "We will find more," it rasped. "We will grow strong again." "Not if I can help it," I said. I pulled out the explosive. Charges I'd taken from my grandfather's supplies, the last ones that hadn't been used in the cabin blast. Military training had taught me where to place them for maximum effect. I set them along the ridge, creating a semicircle around the valley's edge. The Wendigo watched me, head tilted in confusion. It didn't understand human weapons. When the charges were set, I moved to a safe distance and pressed the detonator. The explosions came one after another, tearing into the mountainside. Rocks and trees tumbled down, creating a landslide that reshaped the valley's edge. The natural acoustic properties that had allowed the Wendigo to grow strong, the strange way sound bounced and echoed in that particular valley, were disrupted by the changed landscape. I could feel the difference in the air, the way sound traveled normally now. The Wendigo knew it too. It screamed in fury, but its voice no longer carried the same power. It turned and fled back into the heart of the valley, growing fainter as it went. I made my way down the far side of the ridge, legs shaking with exhaustion. After an hour of walking, I found a highway. A trucker stopped and gave me a ride to the next town over. I didn't go back to the valley for 3 months. When I did, I brought equipment of my own, speakers, microphones, and research I'd done on sound frequencies that could keep the Wendigo weak and contained. The cabin was still. There, half burned but standing. I rebuilt it, reinforcing the walls with soundproofing materials. In the center of the property, I set up a ring of speakers that continuously broadcast the containment frequency my grandfather had discovered. The Wendigo still lives in those woods. Sometimes at night, I hear it testing the boundaries of my sonic fence. Its voice is weaker now, but it's learning again, slowly collecting new sounds from animals and the occasional lost hiker I can't save in time. I've become my grandfather in more ways than I ever wanted. I live alone in these mountains, keeping the Wendigo contained, protecting the town that once tried to sacrifice me. I've installed warning signs and speakers along all the trails leading into the valley, broadcasting messages to turn back. Most people listen. Some don't. For those who ignore the warnings, I can only hope they run at the first echo of their own voice, calling back to them from the trees. Because in this valley, when the forest speaks with your voice, it's already too late. At night, I listen to my grandfather's tapes, learning everything he discovered about the Wendigo and what lives in the spaces between sounds. In his final recording, the one I didn't play until recently, he whispers a warning that keeps me awake at night. The Wendigo is not the worst thing in these mountains, Mason. It's what the Wendigo was keeping away. In true silence lives something, a far worse. Never let the valley fall completely quiet. So I keep the speakers running, I maintain the sonic fence, and I listen, Always listen for any change in the Wendigo's calls, because in this valley, silence would be the most dangerous.
Sound of all, the end.
I still remember the exact moment my life changed forever. The lawyer's voice crackled through my phone as I stood frozen in my small apartment kitchen, coffee mug suspended halfway to my lips. Your father is dead, Ms. Merritt. And he's left you the house. My father, dead. The words should have hurt more than they did, but how do you mourn someone who was never really there? Edward Merritt, the famous anthropologist, had always been more interested in his research than in raising his daughter. Our phone calls over the years could be counted on one hand, and now he'd left me a house. Not money, not normal family heirlooms, a house in the middle of nowhere. There are conditions, the lawyer continued. You must live in the house for one full moon cycle before deciding whether to keep or sell it. A month in New Mexico. I have a job, a life. Your father was very specific, Ms. Merritt. One full lunar cycle, and given the value of the property and surrounding land, I'd suggest it's worth your time. 2 weeks later, I stood at the end of a long dirt road, staring at my inheritance. The house wasn't what I expected. As an architectural historian, I'd seen plenty of desert dwellings. But this was something else, built entirely of stacked stone that gleamed reddish gold in the afternoon sun. It seemed to grow naturally from the landscape, as if the desert itself had decided to take the shape of a house. But something felt off. The proportions were wrong. Windows appeared too close together from the outside to allow for normal-sized rooms within. The roofline bent at angles that defied standard construction methods. You must be Josephine. I jumped at the voice behind. Me, a lean man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin, stood holding a package, the emblem of the Postal Service visible on his truck parked a few yards away. I'm Luis Ortega. I delivered mail to your father for 15 years. He handed me the package. This arrived last week, your father's final delivery. Thank you, I said, taking it. Did you know him well? Luis's eyes darted to the house, then back to me. Nobody knew Edward Merritt well, but I knew enough. He hesitated. Don't stay after sunset, at least not outside. Your father, he made a deal with it. A deal? With what? But Luis was already walking back to his truck. Your father's house, your father's rules, but not your father's land. Remember that. Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, dust billowing behind his departing vehicle. With the package tucked under my arm, I approached the front door. The heavy iron key the lawyer had given me felt unnaturally cold despite the desert heat. It turned with surprising ease in the lock. The interior was cool and smelled of sage and something else I couldn't identify, metallic but organic at the same time. The main room seemed larger than the outside dimensions should allow, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and bookshelves packed with volumes covering another. A narrow hallway led deeper into the house. I dropped my bags and began exploring. Each room brought new questions, a kitchen with counters set at awkward heights, a study with a desk positioned so that sitting at it would mean facing the wall instead of the room. Windows that, when I looked through them, showed different parts of the landscape than they logically should. In one bedroom, my father's, I assumed the ceiling sloped down at one corner to meet the floor, creating a triangular space barely big enough for the strange carved wooden figures arranged in a circle there. Each figure was the same, a hunched, elongated form, not quite human, not quite animal. The package Luis had delivered sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. I ripped it open to find a handwritten journal and a key much smaller than the one to the front door. Josephine, the first page read in my father's tight handwriting. If you're reading this, I've completed my transformation. The house is now yours, as is everything else. Don't be afraid of what you'll find here. It's your birthright. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. Following Luis's warning, I made sure all doors and windows were locked before continuing. To read by the light of an old lamp, the basement contains my life's work. Use the enclosed key, but be warned, once you see, you cannot unsee. The Desert Walker has been waiting for you. Basement? I hadn't seen any access to a basement during my exploration. I scanned the journal for clues, finding pages filled with observations about lunar cycles, soil samples, and repeated mentions of something called the shedding grounds. A diagram caught my eye, a floor plan of the house with a hidden door marked behind what looked like a bookshelf. I returned to the main room and examined the shelf. After pushing and pulling various books, I found one, Desert Evolutionary Adaptations, that didn't slide out but tilted forward with a click. The entire bookshelf swung outward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. With my phone's flashlight leading the way, I made my way down the stairs. The air grew cooler, damper. At the bottom, I fumbled for a light switch and found one. Fluorescent lights flickered on to reveal a laboratory that would make any university research department jealous. Glass-fronted cabinets lined the walls, filled with soil samples, skeletal fragments, and jars containing things I couldn't or didn't want to identify. In the center of the room stood a large table covered with maps of the surrounding desert, each marked with red X's, forming a pattern I didn't recognize. Next to the maps lay a camera connected to what appeared to be motion sensors. One cabinet contained hundreds of wooden carvings, similar to those I'd found upstairs. The hunched, elongated figure in various poses. Some appeared to be shifting, caught between human and animal form. On a desk in the corner sat a computer and several external hard drives. I switched on the computer, surprised to find it unlocked. A video file was open on the desktop, titled simply Night 341. I clicked play. The video showed the exterior of the house at night, captured by what must have been a motion sensor camera. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a dust devil formed in the yard, too perfect in its spiral, too controlled in its movement to be natural. As it dissipated, the ground where it had been showed a perfect spiral pattern in the sand, and at precise intervals along that spiral lay small animal bones, arranged with mathematical precision. Then something moved at the edge of the frame, a blur too fast to see clearly. The camera's night vision captured a figure that seemed to flicker between forms, one moment human-shaped, the next something lower to the ground, four-legged. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding. What had my father been studying out here? What had he meant by transformation? A noise from upstairs made me freeze. Something was moving around in the house, something heavy enough to make the floorboards creak. I wasn't alone. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the lab table and crept up the stairs, each step making my heart beat faster. The sound had stopped, but I could feel something waiting. When I reached the top, I peeked into the main room. Nothing seemed out of place. Maybe it was just the house settling, I told myself. Old houses make noises all the time. But this house wasn't that old. I checked every room, looking behind doors and under furniture. Nothing. But when I reached the kitchen, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The back door, which I was sure I had locked, was open just an inch. I slammed it shut and turned the deadbolt, then pushed a chair against it for good measure. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I tossed and turned, dreaming of spiral patterns in the sand and creatures that couldn't make up their mind about what shape to be. Morning brought clarity and courage. In the daylight, the house seemed less threatening, almost normal if you didn't look too closely at the angles of the walls or the way shadows fell where they shouldn't. I returned to the basement lab to properly go through my father's research. The computer contained years of notes and observations. My father had been studying local legends about something called the Desert Walker, described as part human, part coyote, appearing during dust storms. At first, I thought it was just folklore. But my father's notes grew more detailed over time, with observations that couldn't be explained by superstition. DNA samples showing impossible hybrid combinations, footage of dust patterns forming perfect mathematical sequences without wind, and then there were the soil samples, hundreds of them, each labeled with precise GPS coordinates. According to his notes, these samples showed elevated levels of minerals not normally found in the desert soil, creating a network of what he called adaptation zones. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since yesterday. I headed upstairs to make some breakfast, trying to process everything I had learned. As I was finishing my eggs, a knock at the door made me jump. Through the window, I saw Luis's postal truck. "Morning," he said when I answered. "Brought you some more of your father's mail." He handed me a stack of scientific journals and what looked like supply catalogs. "Thanks," I said. "Hey, Luis, can I ask you something? Did my father ever talk to you about his research, about the Desert Walker?" Luis's face tightened. "Not directly. But my grandmother Alma knows more than anyone about what walks in these parts. She warned your father when he first moved here, but he didn't listen." He paused. "She might talk to you if you want. I'd like that," I said. "I'll bring her by tomorrow," he promised, then glanced at the sky. "Dust storm's coming. Big one. Best stay inside tonight." After he left, I went back to the lab. Among my father's papers, I found audio recordings labeled by date. I selected one from about a year ago and pressed play. My father's voice came through clearly. "Test subject 37 shows increased response to the pheromone compound. Initial contact established at 2:17 a.m. Then another voice answered, or rather, voices. It sounded like multiple people speaking at once, slightly out of sync, creating an echo effect that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Edward Merritt," the voices said. "We accept your offering." My father's reply was eager. "You can understand me clearly now? The compound worked as a translator?" "We have always understood. Now you can hear our response." The conversation continued, growing more technical as my father asked about cellular structures and adaptive capabilities. The multi-voice responded with concepts that seemed to confuse even my father. I skipped ahead on the recording. My father's voice had changed, becoming almost intimate. The preliminary merger was successful. The tissue sample shows complete integration. How does it feel from your perspective? Your blood carries memory. Your cells speak of places beyond the desert. We are learning. And the changes I'm experiencing? They're progressing as expected. Your transformation follows the necessary path. Soon you will shed what you no longer need. I shut off the recording, my hands shaking. What had my father done? What kind of merger was he talking about? I spent the rest of the day going through more of his notes. According to his journals, he believed the Desert Walker wasn't supernatural, but evolutionary, a human subspecies that had developed extreme adaptability to harsh environments. He had been collecting DNA samples from local predators and attempting to identify what he called the transformation trigger. As the sun began to set, the wind picked up outside. Luis's predicted dust storm was rolling in, dark clouds of sand blotting out the horizon. I made sure all windows and doors were locked tight, then continued reading. In his later journals, my father's handwriting became more erratic, his thoughts jumping between topics. He wrote about multiple desert walkers appearing where before he'd only seen one. He described the shedding grounds, places where these creatures left behind skin and bone as they transformed into new forms. A rattling noise from upstairs pulled me from my reading. I grabbed the flashlight again and climbed the steps cautiously. The house was dark now, the dust storm blocking what little evening light remained. As I reached the main floor, a gust of wind hit the house so hard it seemed to shift the entire structure. For a moment, the room around me appeared to stretch, the walls pulling away before snapping back into place. I blinked, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then it happened again. A subtle warping of space that defied everything. I knew about physics and architecture. I moved to the nearest window, using my flashlight to peer outside. The storm had created near-zero visibility, but in the beam of light, I could see the dust was forming patterns on the ground. Not random drifts, but perfect geometric shapes that changed and shifted even as I watched. And then I saw it. Just for a second, a silhouette moving through the storm, tall and human-shaped one moment, then dropping to all fours the next. The beam of my flashlight caught what might have been eyes, reflective like an animal's but too high off the ground, stumbled back from the window. As I turned, my flashlight beam swept across the room and froze on the wall opposite me, where there had definitely been a solid stone wall before. A door now stood partly open, a door that led to a room that couldn't possibly exist based on the house's exterior dimensions. Something inside me said to walk away, to lock myself in my bedroom until morning. But the same curiosity that had driven my father's research now pulled me forward. I approached the door slowly. Cold air drifted from the opening. My hand shook as I pushed it wider. The room beyond was small and perfectly round with a domed ceiling. The walls were covered in detailed carvings, star charts and lunar calendars from what I could tell. In the center of the room stood a pedestal holding a glass case, and inside the case was what looked like a piece of tanned leather, except the pattern on it resembled neither animal hide nor anything human-made. As I stepped fully into the room, the door swung shut behind me. I whirled around, but there was no handle on this side, no way out. And then the carvings on the wall began to glow with a soft blue light. I watched in horror as they started to move, the star patterns shifting across the stone as if tracking the actual movement of celestial bodies. A low humming filled the room, growing louder until it seemed to vibrate through my bones. The glass case in the center cracked, then shattered, the mysterious leather piece floating upward as if suspended by invisible threads. And as I stood transfixed, it began to unfold itself, revealing not leather, but something living, something that had been dormant, but was now awakening. The humming changed to words, the same multi-voice I had heard on my father's recordings. Daughter of Edward, flesh of merged flesh, we have waited for your return. The floating object grew larger, unfolding like origami in reverse, taking a shape that was vaguely human, but wrong in a way I couldn't fully process. What are you? I whispered. We are what your father became, what you will become, the next step. The shape continued to unfold, growing more solid. Edward Merritt completed his transformation. Now the house recognizes its new keeper. As if responding to these words, the door behind me clicked and swung open again. Tonight we watch, the voice said. Tomorrow you begin to understand. The floating shape collapsed suddenly, falling to the floor as a pile of what looked like shed skin. The blue glow faded from the walls. On shaking legs, I backed out of the room. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door swung shut and vanished completely, leaving only solid stone wall where it had been. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door, pushing a dresser in front of it for good measure. Outside, the dust storm raged on, but the noises inside the house had stopped. As I lay in bed, unable to sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. My father hadn't just been studying the desert walker. He had become one. And according to whatever I'd just encountered, I was next. Morning came with a strange sense of calm. The dust storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Perfect spiral patterns covered the ground around the house, as if an artist had spent the night carefully arranging every grain of sand. I splashed cold water on my face and studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Had my eyes always been that amber color? I leaned closer. Tiny flecks of gold now ringed my pupils, catching the light when I turned my head. A knock at the front door made me jump. I found Louise waiting with an elderly woman, her face as weathered as the desert itself. "This is my grandmother Alma," Louise said. "She wanted to meet you." Alma's eyes narrowed as she looked me over. Without a word, she pushed past me into the house. "Sorry," Louise whispered. "She's not big on social graces." I followed Alma as she moved through the rooms, her hand occasionally reaching out to touch a wall or doorframe. In the kitchen, she stopped and pointed to a small bundle of dried plants hanging in a corner, something I hadn't noticed before. "Your father's protection," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "But it's failing now. The balance is shifting." "What balance?" I asked. What was my father protecting himself from? Alma turned to me. "Not from, with. The desert has always had guardians, beings that walk between worlds. Your people would call them skinwalkers. We call them the Ancient Ones." "The Desert Walker," I said quietly. She nodded. "This area has been avoided by my people for generations. We call it the Shedding Grounds, where the Ancient Ones change their skin to adapt to new threats." She gestured around her. "Your father built this house directly on a crossing point, where the boundary between their world and ours is thinnest. But why? To study them at first, then to join them." Her eyes fixed on mine. "He made a blood offering, many offerings, to gain their trust. Eventually he began to change. I thought of the recordings, the talk of mergers and transformation. He was becoming like them. He was becoming one of them," Louise said. "My grandmother warned him, but he said it was necessary, that humans needed to evolve to survive what's coming." "What's coming?" Alma shook her head. "The earth changes. It has happened before. The Ancient Ones adapt. They survive. Edward believed humans could not survive as they are." She reached into a small bag at her waist and pulled out a handful of native plants and small stones. "These will stabilize the house's dimensions, but only temporarily. The Ancient Ones are getting stronger. They want something from you." "What could they possibly want from me?" Alma's eyes met mine. "What does any species want? Continuation. Your father was only the beginning." After they left, I returned to the basement to continue investigating. I found a locked cabinet that required the small key from my father's package. Inside were his medical records, years of tests and scans. As I leafed through them, a pattern emerged. Over the past decade, my father had been changing physically. Notes from confused doctors documented unexplained developments, elongated tendons, increasing bone density, enhanced night vision. One doctor had written, "Patient shows cellular anomalies consistent with adaptive mutation rather than disease process. Recommend further specialized testing." But it seemed my father had stopped seeing conventional doctors after that. A folder labeled Josephine caught my eye. Inside were my own medical records, copies of childhood vaccinations, routine checkups, even my birth certificate. Except this birth certificate didn't match the one in my files at home. According to this document, my mother wasn't Catherine Merritt, the woman who had raised me until her death when I was 10. The mother listed was someone named Jane Doe, literally a woman with no identity. My hands shook as I dug deeper into the folder. My father had been tracking my development too, notes about my unusual flexibility, my perfect night vision, my immune system that had never once failed me. Things I'd always taken for granted as just being healthy. The final page was a DNA test report. I was only half related to Edward Merritt. The other half of my genetic makeup was labeled Unknown Subject B. My stomach lurched. I wasn't entirely human. My father hadn't just been studying these creatures. He had used their DNA to create me. I staggered upstairs and collapsed on the couch, my mind racing. If I wasn't fully human, what was I? And what would happen to me in this house, built specifically to enhance the Skinwalker's presence? As if in answer to my thoughts, the house seemed to shudder around me. I watched in horror as the ceiling above me lowered by several inches, then stopped. The doorway to the kitchen narrowed, the wood frame visibly shrinking. Alma's warning about the house's dimensions echoed in my mind. I ran to gather the plants and stones she had left, placing them at key points around the room as she had shown me. The movement stopped. The house settled back into its strange but stable form. That night, I dreamed of running through the desert on all fours, my body lighter and faster than it had ever been. I woke with sand in my bed and cuts on my feet, as if I had actually been outside running. The next few days passed in a blur of discovery and growing dread. I found cameras hidden throughout the property that had captured glimpses of the skinwalker over years, always at the edges of perception, never fully in a frame. I watched hours of footage showing my father leaving small blood offerings at stone markers across the property. In later videos, he met with the creature directly, their interactions growing more familiar over time. On the fourth night, I woke to find myself not in my bedroom but in the kitchen, a knife in my hand and a small cut on my palm. I had no memory of getting up or cutting myself. On the counter lay a small dead rabbit, perfectly dissected as if by a skilled surgeon. Had I done this? When Luis arrived with the mail the next day, I could barely look him in the eye. Did he know what I was becoming? "You look tired," he said, concern evident in his voice. "I haven't been sleeping well," I admitted. "Luis, did my father ever black out, do things he couldn't remember?" Luis's expression grew guarded. In his last year, yes. He would be found miles from home with no memory of how he got there. Sometimes he'd speak in voices that weren't his own. He paused. "That's happening to you now, isn't it?" I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "It's the house," he said. "It's designed to amplify their presence, to speed up the transformation. You need to leave." "I can't. Not until I understand what's happening to me, what I am," Luis sighed. "My grandmother said you would say that. The ancient ones have already begun to claim you." He handed me a small leather pouch. "Wear this. It won't stop the process, but it might slow it down enough for you to keep your mind." That night, the skinwalker appeared in my dreams again, but this time it spoke directly to me. "Your father prepared the way," it said in that unsettling multi-voice. "His body was too old, too fixed in its form to complete the transformation, but you were made for this." "Made? So I'm just an experiment." "All life is experiment," it replied. Edward Merritt understood what was coming. The collapse of your world's climate, the end of conditions that favor current human form. He sought a bridge between our kinds. And what happens if I refuse to be that bridge? The creature's form shifted, becoming more human-like, though still not quite right. You cannot refuse what you already are. Your cells remember. The change has begun. I woke with a jolt, my heart racing. Something was different about my body. I ran to the bathroom and stared in shock at my reflection. My eyes were fully gold now, with vertical pupils like a cat's. And at my neckline, patches of fine, fur-like growth had appeared overnight. I touched the strange fur, expecting it to feel alien. Instead, it felt natural, as if it had always been part of me. Even more disturbing was my reaction. Not horror, but curiosity. Part of me wanted to see what would happen next. Outside, the sky was darkening with another approaching dust storm. This one felt different, purposeful, directed. The wind picked up, whistling through the house's strange angles in a way that almost sounded like words. I needed answers. Real answers, not riddles and half-truths. I returned to the basement lab, determined to find what my father had been planning all along. In a hidden compartment beneath the main workbench, I discovered a refrigerated box. Inside were tissue samples labeled with dates spanning decades, showing a progressive merger of human and non-human DNA. The final sample, dated just weeks before my father's death, was labeled Complete Transformation. Next to it lay a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in my father's hand. Josephine is the key, not just my daughter, but the daughter of two worlds. As I read those words, the house around me groaned and shifted. The walls seemed to become fluid, stretching and moving as if they were breathing. The basement door slammed shut, locking me in, and then the skinwalker's voice filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Now you understand. Now you must choose. I pressed my hands against the basement door, panic rising in my chest. "Let me out!" I shouted. But the house only seemed to groan in response, the walls continuing their impossible movement. Suddenly, the computer behind me switched on by itself. On the screen, words began to appear as if someone was typing them in real time. Daughter of Edward, we will not harm you. You are precious. I approached the screen slowly. Who are you? What are you? More words appeared. We are many. We have existed alongside humans since before your cities, before your language. The Skinwalker, I whispered. That is one name of many. We change as needed. We survive. My fear was slowly being replaced by curiosity, the same curiosity that had driven my father. What do you want from me? To complete what Edward began, a bridge between our kinds. The dust from the storm outside was somehow finding its way into the basement, forming patterns on the floor, symbols that looked like a language I'd never seen before. Yet strangely I could understand their meaning. You said my father completed his transformation. What does that mean? Is he dead? Death is your word for ending. Edward has not ended. He has joined us. His knowledge, his memories, his essence continues. This was too much to process. You're saying my father is part of you now, part of whatever you are? Yes, and he waits for you. A noise from upstairs broke the strange connection. The basement door suddenly unlocked itself. I rushed up the stairs to find Alma standing in the main room, her arms raised as she chanted in a language I didn't recognize. What are you doing? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, deeper with an odd resonance behind it. Alma lowered her arms and fixed me with a stern look. Trying to contain what's happening. The balance is nearly broken. She gestured to my face. Look at yourself. The change is accelerating. I caught my reflection in a window and gasped. My eyes were fully golden now, and the patches of fur had spread across my neck and jawline. My fingers seemed longer, the joints more flexible. Help me, I whispered. I cannot stop it, she replied. But I can try to slow it, to give you time to decide. She opened a bag and began placing items around the room, bundles of herbs, stones, small carved figures. You've done this before, haven't you? She nodded. For generations, my family has maintained the boundary. We cannot destroy the ancient ones. They are as much a part of this land as the rocks and sand, but we keep them from spreading too far, too fast. As she worked, the house seemed to resist her efforts. Doorways shifted position when she wasn't looking. Windows showed impossible landscapes, places that couldn't exist in our world. My father, I said, is he really still alive somehow? Not as you would understand it. His consciousness has joined with theirs. A collective mind that spans countless beings, she paused. They have been seeking this for centuries, a willing human to bridge our worlds. But why me? Why did he create me? You were his offering and his legacy. A human with the capacity to fully transform and retain consciousness. A perfect bridge. As Alma finished her containment ritual, several tribal elders arrived. They formed a circle in the main room, chanting and burning herbs. The house fought back, walls bending and floors tilting. I felt the changes in my body accelerating in response, as if the house and I were connected. Without warning, a violent tremor shook the building. Two of the elders were thrown against walls that seemed to become liquid, engulfing them before solidifying again. Their screams cut off abruptly. "Stop!" I shouted, and to my surprise, the house obeyed. The tremors ceased. The remaining elders backed away from me in fear. Alma alone stood her ground. "It's too late," she said. "The house responds to you now. The Ancient Ones recognize you as their own." "I didn't ask for this." "None of us asks for our inheritance," she replied calmly. "We simply choose what to do with it." That night, the Skinwalker communicated with me through the sand patterns, explaining things more clearly than before. They weren't a single entity, but a collective consciousness, beings that had evolved the ability to change their physical form in response to threats. "We adapt instantly where humans take generations," they explained, through patterns formed in dust on my bedroom floor. "We survive what would destroy others. And my father? Where is he in all this?" In response, the dust formed a familiar face, my father as I remembered him, then shifting to show him transformed, part of the collective. "Can I talk to him?" "The real him?" The dust scattered, then reformed into words. "He waits for you in the deep room. But entering means accelerating your change." I knew the deep room had to be the round chamber that had appeared during the first dust storm. As if responding to my thoughts, I heard a door opening down the hall. My transformation was progressing, and quickly now. My hands had become more claw-like, my senses sharper. I could smell the fear on the remaining elders who had retreated to the edge of the property. I could hear the heartbeats of small animals hiding from the coming storm. I followed the sound of the open door and found the round room waiting for me. This time I wasn't afraid. As I stepped inside, the door remained open behind me. The blue light appeared on the walls again, the star charts moving and shifting. In the center of the room, a figure began to form, my father, but changed. His form kept shifting between human and something else, never fully settling on either. "Josephine," he said, his voice carrying that same multi-toned quality I'd heard in the recordings. "You came. You didn't give me much choice," I replied. "There is always choice. I made mine. By turning yourself into... What? What are you now?" "The next step," he said simply. "Humans have reached the limit of their current form. The world is changing faster than natural evolution can adapt. The Ancient Ones offer another path. By becoming skinwalkers, by becoming something new, neither fully human nor fully other. A bridge species that can survive what's coming. The climate. Collapse," I said, remembering what the Skinwalker had shown me in my dreams. He nodded. "Floods, fires, deserts spreading where forests once stood. Humans with their fixed forms cannot adapt quickly enough, but we can." So this was all some twisted conservation project. Create a new human that can survive. Not just survive. Thrive. Lead others through the transition. He gestured around him. "This house isn't just a building. It's a transformation chamber designed to amplify the Ancient One's natural abilities." The room began to pulse with light, and I felt my body responding, cells awakening to new possibilities, bones ready to reshape themselves. "It hurts," I gasped, as a wave of pain washed over me. "The transition is painful," my father acknowledged, "but necessary. I lacked the genetic foundation to complete it fully in life. That's why I created you, a child with the right building blocks. You used me. I gave you gifts beyond imagining. Perfect health, enhanced senses, the ability to adapt and survive." His form shifted again, becoming more inhuman. "And now I offer you the final gift, full transformation. Join us, Josephine. Become what you were born to be." The house shook around us, dust swirling into the room to form a whirlwind of patterns and shapes. Through the open door, I could see the main, Room changing, furniture melting into the floor, walls becoming membrane-like, pulsing with life. The house is transforming too, I realized. Everything connected to us transforms eventually, my father said. It becomes part of the network. Another tremor hit, stronger than before. I heard shouts from outside, the tribal elders retreating. Further from the property as the ground began to crack and shift, forming the same spiral patterns I'd seen in the dust. What happens if I say no? I asked. My father's form flickered. Then the failsafe activates. Your unique genetics were built with a shutdown mechanism. Refuse and both you and this house will break down at the cellular level. Everything your father worked for will be lost. So I transform or die. That's not much of a choice. Not just you, he corrected, everything connected to this work. All possibility of saving humanity from what's coming. Outside, the dust storm had fully engulfed the property. Through the windows, I could see multiple shadows moving within it. Other skinwalkers drawn to the transformation energy. You need to decide, my father said, his form becoming less stable. The house cannot maintain this state much longer without your commitment. Join us or trigger the failsafe. I looked down at my changing hands, at the fur now covering much of my skin. How much of me was still human? How much had already crossed over? And did I really want to go back, knowing what I now knew about what was coming for humanity? Luis's truck pulled up outside, headlights cutting through the dust storm. He had returned, despite the danger, but he wasn't alone. Through the window, I could see other vehicles arriving, government vehicles. They've come for the house, my father said, for us. They've always feared what they don't understand. I had to make my choice, and I had to make it now. I watched through the window as men in tactical gear poured out of the government vehicles. They carried weapons and scientific equipment, approaching the house with careful steps. Their arrival gave me a strange sense of clarity. I need more time, I told my father's flickering form. There is no more time, he replied. Choose now. I closed my eyes, feeling the changes in my body. The new awareness of muscle and bone, the heightened senses that let me hear heartbeats from across the room, the connection to the house itself, as if it were an extension of my skin. Josephine! Luis's voice called from outside. Come out! They're going to secure the house. When I opened my eyes again, my father was gone. I was alone in the round room, with a decision that would change everything. I stepped out into the main room just as the front door burst open. Armed men poured in, followed by scientists in protective gear. They froze when they saw me, taking in my changed appearance. The golden eyes, the patches of fur, the elongated fingers. Ma'am, we need you to come with us, one of the soldiers said, his gun not quite pointed at me, but ready to be. Luis pushed his way through them. Josephine, we have to go, now! Behind him stood Alma, her face resigned. I had to tell them, she said. The balance is broken. The ancient ones are gathering. What is this place? Demanded a woman in a lab coat, looking around at the pulsing walls and shifting dimensions of the house. I felt the answer rise within me, knowledge that wasn't mine, but somehow was. It's an incubation site, I said, my voice carrying that strange, multi-toned quality. A place between worlds. She's infected, one of the scientists said. We need to get her to containment. Two soldiers moved toward me. Without thinking, I stepped back and the house responded, the floor between us suddenly stretching, putting 20 feet of distance where there had been only 5. How did she? One began, but was cut off as the lights flickered. The dust storm outside intensified, the wind howling through the house's strange angles. Sand began pouring in through every crack and opening, swirling around the room in patterns too perfect to be natural. It's happening, Alma whispered. The merging. I felt it too, a connection to something vast and ancient, a consciousness that spanned not just the skinwalkers, but the land itself. In that moment I understood what my father had discovered. These beings weren't separate entities, but a single adaptive organism, capable of taking whatever form was needed to survive. And they had been preparing for this moment for generations. "Everyone needs to leave," I said, the authority in my voice, surprising even me. "The house is becoming unstable." "We're not going anywhere," the lead scientist said, stepping forward with some kind of scanner. "This site is now government property, and you, Ms. Merritt, are coming with us for study." As if in answer, the house gave a violent shudder. Cracks appeared in the ceiling, and one of the walls simply vanished, revealing not the outside, but a landscape that couldn't exist on Earth. Red sands stretching to a horizon with two moons. The soldiers opened fire on the impossible view, their bullets disappearing into the alien landscape. The scientists screamed, backing away. "I warned you," I said calmly. Luis grabbed my arm. "Josephine, please come with me. Whatever's happening, we can figure it out together." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes held the same golden flecks as mine. "You're like me," I whispered. "Part of it." He nodded slightly. "My grandmother's bloodline has carried the Ancient One's genetics for generations. Not enough to transform, but enough to understand, to communicate. You knew all along, I suspected. Your father confirmed it." He squeezed my arm. "But you have a choice. You can fight the change." Another tremor shook the house. Stronger this time. The remaining soldiers began a retreat, dragging the protesting scientists with them. "Ms. Merritt, this is your final warning," one called from the doorway. "Come with us now, or we'll be forced to consider you a threat." I looked at the government team, then at Luis and Alma. Then I turned my gaze to the swirling sand that now filled much of the room, forming the vague shape of my father. In that moment, I felt a presence touch my mind. Not just my father, but hundreds of others. The collective consciousness of the skinwalkers reached out, showing me glimpses of what could be. I saw the climate disasters my father had predicted. Cities underwater, forests burning, millions displaced. But I also saw new communities forming, people adapting in ways that seemed impossible. Humans evolving, not over thousands of years, but within a single generation. And guiding them were beings like me, neither fully human nor fully other, but something new. A bridge species that could survive in both worlds. "I understand now," I said softly. The sand swirled faster, forming words on the floor. "Your choice." I took a deep breath. "I accept my inheritance." The change came fast this time. I felt my bones shifting, muscles stretching in new configurations. But it wasn't painful. It felt right, as if my body had been waiting for permission to become what it was always meant to be. The soldiers at the door opened fire. I should have been riddled with bullets, but my body moved with impossible speed, shifting between solid and something else, not quite matter as humans understood it. The house responded to my transformation, its structure becoming fluid. Walls merged with floors, ceilings opened to the sky. The foundation sent root-like structures deep into the earth, anchoring to something far below. "Run," I told Luis and Alma. "Take anyone you can. Get clear of the property." Luis hesitated. "Will I see you again?" "Yes," I promised, "when it's time." As they fled with the remaining humans, I gave myself fully to the change. My consciousness expanded, touching the minds of others like me, the desert walkers who had gathered for this moment, and there among them was my father, not as the man I had known, but as part of something greater. "Welcome, daughter." His thoughts touched mine. "You have completed what I could not." The transformation rippled outward, from the house changing the land itself. The government vehicles stalled and died as the sand beneath them shifted. Only Luis's truck, already at the edge of the property, managed to escape. As the last humans disappeared from view, I stepped out onto what had been the front porch. Now, a platform of stone and living tissue that pulsed with its own heartbeat. My body flowed between forms, human one moment, something else the next, the boundaries between shapes becoming meaningless. In the distance, dust storms gathered on the horizon, each containing silhouettes like mine, other skinwalkers answering the call of transformation. I understood my purpose now. My father had been right about one thing. Humanity needed to evolve to survive what was coming, but he had been wrong about how. Not through fear or force, but through bridge builders like me who could exist in both worlds. The house had become something new, an incubation chamber for the next phase. Soon others would come, those with the right genetic markers, the potential to adapt. I would guide them through their own transformations, easing the pain and fear that my father had faced alone. And in time, when the world had changed beyond recognition, we would be ready. Not monsters from legend, but the next step in human evolution. Guardians of a future my father had only glimpsed. I looked down at my hands, sometimes human, sometimes clawed, always changing, and felt not horror, but acceptance. This was my inheritance. Not just a house in the desert, but a purpose. The sun was setting, painting the desert gold and red. In the growing darkness, I could see more clearly than ever before. The world was full of possibilities I had never imagined. Behind me, the house, my house now, pulsed with welcome. Ahead, the desert stretched endlessly, filled with others waiting to be found and guided. I stepped off the porch, my feet sometimes touching the ground, sometimes not. The transformation was complete, but also just beginning. This was my inheritance, and I was ready. As night fell completely, I moved into the desert, sometimes running on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. The dust rose around me, forming perfect spirals in my wake. From a distance, I might have looked like a coyote or a person, or something in between. The truth was simpler and more complex. I was whatever I needed to be. The moon rose full and bright. I raised my face to its light, letting out a sound that was part human cry, part animal call, an announcement to all who could hear. The desert walker had returned, and she was no longer walking alone. In the distance, other voices answered. The skinwalkers gathering, ready for what came next, ready for the future my father had sacrificed everything to prepare for. I looked back once more at the house, now a glowing organic structure unlike anything human architecture had created. It would stand as a beacon for those who would follow, those who, like me, would bridge the gap between what humanity was and what it needed to become. Then I turned and ran into the night, embracing the endless change that was now my nature. The inheritance was not just the house or even my transformed body. It was the future itself, and for the first time in my life, I was truly home. The trees weren't right. That was my first thought when our trucks rolled to a stop at what would be our home for the next 6 months. I'd been cutting timber for 15 years, but I'd never seen trees like these. They stretched so high I couldn't see their tops, even when I leaned back until my neck hurt. Something about them made my skin crawl, like they were watching us. "Vic, you seeing this?" My brother Nathan jumped down from the passenger seat, his eyes wide as he stared up. At 25, he was 10 years younger than me, still full of that excitement I'd lost somewhere along the way. "Yeah, I see it." I grabbed my clipboard and tried to sound normal. "Let's get camp set up before dark. My name is Victor Reynolds, and I'm the foreman for this logging crew." The company had sent us deeper than usual into the Washington forests, to a patch of old-growth timber that wasn't on any of our maps. 8 of us total, me, my brother Nathan, old Paul Fitzgerald, who'd been cutting longer than I'd been alive, Dennis, our cook, who doubled as our medic, and 4 solid workers. Frank, Isaiah, Mike, and Denny, the headquarters guy who briefed us, called it a pristine claim with exceptional potential. What he didn't say was how it felt wrong from the first moment. The silence was the first thing that hit you. Forests are never quiet. They're full of birds, insects, wind in the leaves. But this place swallowed sound like a cave. We unloaded the trucks and set up our camp. Canvas tents, a bigger one for cooking and eating, our equipment lined up neat and ready. Dennis got a fire going and started dinner while the rest of us marked out the camp boundaries. "Radio check," I said, testing our connection to headquarters. It crackled with static, the voice on the other end barely coming through. You repeat." Then nothing but white noise. Paul came up beside me, his leathery face grim. "Reception's always bad in the deep woods. We'll try again tomorrow from higher ground." That night, gathered around the fire, the mood was strange. Usually first nights at a new site were full of jokes and stories. But everyone was quiet, watching the darkness between the massive trees. Even the fire seemed dimmer than it should be, like the forest was drinking the light. "So, what's the plan for tomorrow, boss?" Frank asked, breaking the silence. "We start surveying the area," I said. "Nathan and I will map the eastern section. Paul, you take Isaiah and start marking the western edge. Frank, Mike, and Denny, you start clearing the access road wider so supply trucks can make it in. Dennis stays at camp. Those trees are gonna be worth a fortune," Mike said, but his voice didn't have its usual enthusiasm. "If we can cut them," Paul muttered. "Never seen wood that old." I woke up before dawn, my sleep broken by dreams I couldn't remember, except that they left me cold, with sweat. The trees were just silhouettes against the pale sky, but they seemed to have moved closer to our camp overnight. I told myself it was just the strange light playing tricks. By noon the next day, we'd barely made any progress. Our chainsaws seemed dulled against the wood, and the forest was so dense we couldn't get our bearings right. The maps made no sense compared to what we were seeing. "This isn't right," Nathan said, comparing the aerial survey to what was in front of us. "According to this, we should be at the edge of a clearing, but there's nothing but trees for miles." Then we heard the scream. High and panicked, cutting off suddenly. We ran back toward camp, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We found Frank on the ground, his chainsaw next to him, his hand gone. Blood everywhere. Dennis was already working on him, wrapping the stump tight. "What happened?" I demanded as Nathan helped Dennis. Frank's face was white as paper. "The saw. It jumped. I swear to God, Vic, it jumped right out of my hands like it was alive, pulled itself right into me." I'd been around logging accidents my whole life. Equipment doesn't jump, but the look in Frank's eyes, pure terror, wasn't something you could fake. That night we used the emergency radio to call for a medical evacuation, but all we got was static. "We'd have to take Frank out ourselves in the morning." "I don't like this place," Dennis said quietly as we sat by the fire. "Something's not right about these woods." Nathan nodded. "I found something today. Weird arrangements of broken branches, twisted into shapes, not natural. Like someone was marking trails, but not with any system I've ever seen. Probably just animal damage," I said, but I didn't believe it. Nothing about this forest felt natural, not the size of the trees, not the silence, not the way shadows seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. "We should leave," Paul said suddenly. "All of us, not just Frank." I shook my head. "We have a job to do. The company's counting on this timber. We'll get Frank out tomorrow and then get back to work." That night, I dreamed of trees that walked and watched with eyes hidden in their bark. When I jolted awake at 3 a.m., everyone else was awake too, sitting up in their sleeping bags with the same haunted look. None of us spoke about our dreams. Some things are too strange to say out loud. But I knew then we'd made a terrible mistake, coming to this place, and it was only our second day in Timber Hollow. The next morning, I drove Frank back to the nearest town with a hospital, about 4 hours away. The whole drive, he kept looking back at the forest like he expected it to follow us. Maybe he wasn't wrong. "Don't go back there, Vic," he said when I dropped him off. "That place, it doesn't want us there." I laughed it off, but my laugh sounded hollow even to me. "It's just trees, Frank. Get some rest." But as I drove back to camp, the forest seemed to crowd closer to the road, like it was reaching for me. Twice I had to stop and check the map, because landmarks I'd noted on the way out were simply gone. When I finally reached camp near nightfall, everyone looked uneasy. "Radio's completely dead," Dennis reported. "And our food's going bad way too fast. The coolers aren't working right." "The meat's gone," he added, looking confused. "All of it. But there's this weird mushroom stuff growing everywhere instead." I checked myself, and sure enough, where our protein supplies should have been was a mass of pale fungi I'd never seen before. "We'll make do," I said. "The supply drop is scheduled in 2 weeks." "If they can find us," Paul muttered. Over the next few days, things got stranger. Our logging markers kept moving overnight. Trails we cut one day would be gone the next, with no sign they'd ever been there. The trees seemed to regrow at impossible speeds. Nathan started spending time with a raven, a big bird with unusual white patches on its wings. "It's trying to tell me something," he insisted when I told him to focus on work. "It keeps leading me away from the north section." "It's a bird, Nathan. It's not telling you anything." But I was wrong. That night, we all had the same nightmare, every single one of us. We were trees, rooted in place, while tall, spindly figures moved through the forest, harvesting pieces of us with long, branch-like fingers. I woke up gasping and heard the others doing the same. "Did you dream?" Isaiah started to ask, then fell silent when we all nodded. "This isn't possible," Dennis whispered. 8 people don't have identical dreams. But it wasn't the last impossible thing. That day, Dennis found cave paintings in a hollow not far from camp. They showed elongated figures with too many limbs, harvesting smaller human figures from trees, just like our dreams. I tried to maintain order, to keep everyone focused on the job, but even I couldn't explain what was happening. When we cut into the trees, the growth rings were wrong. They formed patterns, symbols almost, nothing like natural tree rings. And then came the animals. A deer with 4 eyes watched us from the tree line. Birds with wings growing from their chests instead of their backs circled our camp. None of them made a sound. "Something's hunting us," Paul said one night. "I've been in logging camps all my life, and I've never felt like this, like we're being sized up. It's just isolation," I insisted, "playing tricks on us." But I didn't believe it, especially after what happened to Isaiah. He went to mark boundaries on the 6th day. Standard procedure. He would have done it 100 times before, but he never came back. We searched until dark, then set out again at first light with lanterns and whistles. All we found were his boots, placed neatly at the base of a massive pine, the laces carefully tied. "This isn't happening," Mike kept saying, his voice getting higher each time. "People don't just vanish, but in this forest they did." What was worse was what we found the next day. Isaiah's belt arranged in a perfect circle around a small sapling. The day after that, his watch, the band twisted around a branch like a snake. Each day, a new item, each more personal. His hair, fingernail clippings, a tooth. Some of the men wanted to leave right then. I should have listened. But the company was counting on this timber, and I'd never failed a job before. "We stay. We finish the survey, and we wait for the supply drop," I ordered. "No one goes anywhere alone." That night, Nathan showed me what his raven friend had brought him, a tattered leather journal, the pages yellow with age. It was dated 1879 and described an expedition to these same woods. They'd encountered a creature they called the Tall Walker, something that moved like a man but wasn't one, with too many joints and limbs that bent the wrong way. The final entry simply read, "It wears Davis's face now. God help us all." "Vic," Nathan said quietly, "have you noticed how the trees seem bigger inside than outside? How the paths loop back to camp no matter which way we go?" I had. I'd tried to tell myself it was just disorientation, but I'd been mapping forests for too long to make those kinds of mistakes. And Dennis found something in our water supply, some kind of paralyzing agent from the local mushrooms. I felt sick. We're leaving, first thing tomorrow. But by then it was already too late. That night no one slept. We sat in a circle around the fire, backs to each other, watching the darkness between the trees. That's when Paul finally told us what he knew. "I've been here before," he said, his voice barely a whisper. 20 years ago. Different part of the forest, but the same presence. We all stared at him. My whole crew disappeared. 7 men. The company covered it up, called it a landslide, gave us all bonuses to keep quiet. He looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "They know about this place. They've always known." "Why would they send people here if they know it's dangerous?" Dennis asked. Paul just shook his head. "I don't know, but I think we're not the first sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" Mike's voice cracked. "What do you mean, sacrifice?" Before Paul could answer, we heard it. A sound like wood creaking but rhythmic, almost like footsteps. Something was moving at the edge of our camp, just beyond the light. "Nobody move," I whispered, reaching slowly for my axe. It stepped into the firelight, and everything I thought I knew about the world fell apart. It looked almost human, but wrong in every way. Too tall, at least 9 feet, with limbs that bent at extra joints. Its skin was like bark, patterns swirling across its surface. Where its face should be was a blank wooden mask with holes for eyes, but nothing behind them except darkness. The Sasquatch, but not like any Sasquatch legend I'd ever heard. This was something else entirely. It stood there, swaying slightly, watching us. Then it reached out one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at Nathan. My brother gasped and fell, backward, clutching his head. "It's in my head," he choked out. "It's talking to me." Then it was gone, melting back into the forest so quickly I wasn't sure it had been there at all. But the silence it left behind was deafening. Nathan was shaking, his eyes wide. It showed me things. This forest, it's all one organism. The Sasquatch is just its hands, its way of interacting with us. "That's crazy," Mike said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Paul said quietly. "He's right, that's why we can't leave. The forest won't let us." The next day we discovered the clearing, a perfect circle of moss-covered ground, untouched by trees except for a massive stump in the center. The stump was ancient, larger around than a car, with symbols carved into its surface. "I've seen this place before," Nathan said. "In my dreams, Dennis knelt by the stump, running his hands over the symbols. These match the cave paintings. And look, there are names carved here." He pointed to a section where dozens of names had been etched into the wood. "These must be the people who came before us." I recognized a few names from old company records, logging crews that had supposedly quit or relocated. They'd been here all along. As we stood there, Nathan's raven landed on the stump, cawing loudly. It hopped around, scratching at the wood as if trying to show us something. "It's trying to help us," Nathan said. "It's a bird," Denny snapped, his nerves clearly frayed. The raven cawed again, then suddenly spoke, its voice raspy but distinctly human. "Not bird! Trapped! Help us!" We all jumped back. Mike screamed. "The Sasquatch," the raven continued, struggling with each word. "Changes us, traps us. I was human long ago." I couldn't process what I was hearing. A talking raven claiming to be human. But after everything else we'd seen, was this really so impossible? "How do we stop it?" I asked. The raven hopped closer. "Heart, in the stump, but beware, it hungers." Before we could ask more, we heard the wood-cracking footsteps again, but this time there was something different about them. Something familiar. Isaiah stepped into the clearing, but it wasn't really him. His movements were jerky, his eyes empty. And when he smiled, his teeth were made of small white pebbles. "Hello, friends," he said, but his voice was wrong, like multiple. Voices speaking together. Why are you trying to leave? Don't you like our forest? Mike ran. The thing that looked like Isaiah turned its head too far, neck bending at an impossible angle, and smiled wider. We'll find him, it said lightly. We know every root and branch. We backed away slowly, keeping our eyes on the Isaiah thing. It just watched us, head tilted like a curious bird. That night, back at camp, we made our plan. The next supply drop was still a week away. We couldn't wait that long. We make a run for it, I said. First light tomorrow, we take what we can carry and head straight for the trucks. It won't let us leave, Paul said. It never does. Then we'll fight our way out, I replied, checking the edge of my axe. But Paul was right. The forest had no intention of letting us go. We didn't make it to first light. They came for us in the darkness, not just the Sasquatch, but the trees themselves. Roots erupted from the ground, wrapping around our ankles. Branches reached down, like arms grabbing at us. Run, I shouted, hacking at a root that had wrapped around my leg. Head for the trucks. We scattered, fighting our way through the animated forest. I could hear screaming behind me, but couldn't tell who it was. The darkness was filled with moving shapes, some like trees, others like stretched human forms. I found Nathan pinned against a tree trunk, struggling as roots slowly wrapped around his arms and legs. I chopped him free, and we ran together, following the white shape of the raven flying ahead of us. We burst into a small clearing, and there it was, the Sasquatch. But this time, we could see it wasn't alone. There were others behind it, different shapes and sizes, some more human-looking than others. What do you want? I shouted, pushing Nathan behind me. The Sasquatch tilted its head. Then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into our minds, a voice like rustling leaves. To survive, to grow, as we have always done. Images flooded my head. The forest as it was centuries ago, native shamans performing rituals around the central stump, creating a guardian for the forest. But over time, the guardian had changed, grown beyond its purpose, consuming the consciousness of those who entered its domain to fuel its own evolution. You send them to us, the voice continued. Your company, generation after generation. A tribute. More images. Company men making deals with the forest entity, offering logging crews in exchange for safe passage, for the right to harvest trees from the outer edges. That's why headquarters sent us here, Nathan realized. They knew. They've always known. The head of your company is sick, the Sasquatch said, dying. He believes our essence can save him. Perhaps it can. I thought about the briefing, how eager the company had been to get us to this specific tract of forest, how they'd offered bonuses for speed and discretion. We're not your sacrifice, I growled, gripping my axe tighter. The Sasquatch made a sound like branches breaking. Laughter. You have been since you entered our domain, but we offer choice. One voluntary sacrifice, and the rest may go. Refuse, and we take you all. Before I could respond, Nathan stepped forward. If I stay, you let the others go. Nathan, no. I grabbed his arm. I've been dreaming about this place my whole life, he said quietly. I think I was always meant to come here. A wise choice, the Sasquatch said. The willing are always stronger additions. Nathan, you can't, I pleaded. We'll find another way, but he just smiled sadly. There is no other way, Vic. The raven showed me. This is how it has to be. The bird lies, the Sasquatch said sharply. It has always worked against us. The raven cawed angrily from a nearby branch, then spoke again. Heart, in the stump, break the cycle. The Sasquatch made a gesture, and roots shot up, grabbing the raven. It squeezed until the bird went silent. Now, the Sasquatch said, turning back to Nathan, your transformation begins. It placed its long wooden fingers against Nathan's temples, and he screamed. A sound so full of pain it tore through me like a physical blow. No! I swung my axe at the Sasquatch, but it blocked the blow with its arm. The axe sank into the wood of its limb, but didn't seem to cause it pain. "You would break our agreement?" it asked, yanking the axe from my hands. "Then you all will. Join us!" The roots came alive again, grabbing at me. I heard shouts from the others. Dennis and Paul were nearby, also fighting the animated forest. "Run, Vic!" Nathan shouted through his pain. "Find the heart!" I hesitated, torn between helping my brother and following his instructions. "Go!" he screamed. "I can feel it taking over. I can't fight it much longer." With the heaviest heart imaginable, I ran, leaving my brother behind. Paul and Dennis followed me, the forest reaching for us at every step. We had to find the stump. We had to end this, for Nathan and for all the others this forest had taken. We ran through the night, the forest coming alive around us. Trees uprooted themselves to block our path. Vines snaked out to trip us. Worst of all were the half-transformed humans, former victims of the forest, now part of it, reaching for us with hands that were partially turned to wood, their eyes empty and desperate. "There," Dennis pointed ahead, "the clearing." We burst into the circular space where the massive stump sat. In the pale moonlight, it looked like an altar. "How do we destroy it?" Paul asked, gasping for breath. The answer came from above. The raven, somehow escaped from the Sasquatch's grasp, landed on the stump. It was injured, missing feathers and bleeding, but it managed to croak out, "Chainsaw! Heart! Inside!" I nodded and ran back to where we'd dropped our packs. My chainsaw was there, unused since our arrival. I grabbed it and ran back. "Cover me," I told Paul and Dennis. "I need time to cut through this thing." They nodded, standing with their backs to me, axes raised as the forest continued to close in. I pulled the starter cord on the chainsaw, and it roared to life, the sound unnaturally loud in the clearing. The moment the blade touched the ancient wood of the stump, a scream echoed through the forest, not human, not animal, but something in between. The trees around the clearing began to bend inward, reaching for us. Paul and Dennis fought them off as best they could, but there were too many. "Hurry, Vic!" Dennis shouted. The chainsaw cut deeper, and the screaming grew louder. Sap oozed from the cut, not amber or clear like normal sap, but deep red like blood. Suddenly, the Sasquatch was there, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. But it wasn't alone. Nathan was with it, or what used to be Nathan. His body was stretched, his limbs elongated with new joints, his skin beginning to harden into bark. "Stop," Nathan's voice came, but hollow, like it was being spoken through him rather than by him. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I'm saving you," I grunted, continuing to cut. "I don't want to be saved. The thing that had been my brother." Said, "I can see everything now, feel everything. The forest is beautiful." The Sasquatch stepped forward, and Paul moved to intercept it. They clashed, axe against wooden limbs, but it was no contest. The Sasquatch picked Paul up like he weighed nothing and threw him against a tree. He crumpled to the ground, not moving. Dennis rushed to help, but roots erupted from the earth, wrapping around his legs and pulling him down. He screamed as they began to burrow into his skin, tiny tendrils pushing under his flesh. I was alone now, just me and the chainsaw against the heart of the forest. The saw was halfway through the stump, the red sap pumping out in rhythm like a heartbeat. "Please, Vic," Nathan's voice came again, closer now. "Join us. It doesn't hurt after the first change." I looked up at what had been my brother, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I can't let this thing take anyone else." The chainsaw hit something solid in the center of the stump, something that wasn't wood. The blade sparked and screamed, but I kept pushing. Whatever was in there, it was the heart of this thing, the source of its power. The Sasquatch howled and lunged for me, but suddenly the raven was there, diving at its face, clawing at its eyes. It bought me precious seconds, enough to push the chainsaw through the final barrier. There was a sound like thunder, and a wave of energy pulsed out from the stump, knocking me backward. The chainsaw flew from my hands. The forest seemed to pause, every branch and root going still. Then I saw it. Exposed in the cut I'd made was something that looked like a human heart, but massive, pulsing with a sickly green light. Around it were hundreds of smaller hearts, all beating in sync. The original shamans, the raven gasped, landing beside me, and all who came after, their hearts powering it. I staggered to my feet, grabbed my axe, and with all my strength brought it down on the central heart. It burst, like a rotten fruit, spraying that red sap everywhere. The smaller hearts began to burst too, one after another like firecrackers. The Sasquatch screamed, a sound so full of pain and rage it seemed to shake the earth. It fell to its knees, wooden limbs cracking and splintering. All around the clearing, the animated trees began to collapse, their unnatural life force draining away. Nathan collapsed too, his partly transformed body shuddering. I ran to him, cradling his head in my lap. "Vic," he whispered, his voice his own again. I saw everything. What it was, what it wanted. "Don't talk," I said, tears falling onto his face. "We'll get you help." He shook his head weakly. "Too late for me. The change went too far." His skin was hardening rapidly now, turning to wood before my eyes. But I'm not afraid. Part of me will live on in the forest. A better guardian than what came before. "Nathan, please," I begged. But his eyes were already growing dull, the light in them fading. "Promise me," he whispered. "Promise you'll tell the truth about this place, about what the company did." "I promise," I said, clutching his hand even as it turned to wood beneath my fingers. His last words were so quiet, I barely heard them. "I'll be watching," from the trees. Then he was gone, his body completely transformed into wood, a perfect sculpture of my brother, frozen in his final moment. The forest was quiet now, truly quiet for the first time since we'd arrived. The Sasquatch had collapsed into a pile of dead wood and tangled roots. All around, the trees stood straight and still, no longer reaching or grasping. Dennis was alive, though badly injured. Paul was unconscious but breathing. They would survive, though Paul's partially transformed arm would never be the same. The raven hopped onto Nathan's wooden shoulder, its head bowed as if in respect. "Thank you," it said simply. "Free now, all of us." 3 days later, a rescue team found us staggering down the access road. They'd been sent when we missed our second radio check-in. We told them there had been an accident, that Nathan and the others had been killed by falling trees. I didn't tell them about the Sasquatch, or the living forest, or the company's century of sacrifices. Not then. Some truths are too big, too terrible to be believed without proof. But I kept my promise to Nathan. I gathered evidence, company records, the journal from 1879, soil samples containing the strange fungi. 6 months later, I took it all public. The company denied everything, of course, but the evidence was too strong to ignore completely. They were investigated, fined, their operations in the Pacific Northwest suspended. And the forest? The state declared it a protected wilderness area. No one cuts timber there anymore. I went back just once, a year after it happened. The clearing was gone, filled in with new growth, the massive stump nowhere to be seen. But as I stood at the edge of that ancient forest, I saw something that made my heart stop. A young tree, just tall enough to stand out from the underbrush, with branches that seemed to form a familiar shape. For a moment, just a moment, I could swear those branches formed my brother's face, watching me with eyes of knotholes and a smile made of bark. The wind whispered through the leaves, and if you've spent enough time in the forest like I have, sometimes you can hear words in that sound. Just your imagination, most likely, but I know what I heard. I'm still here, Vic. I'm still watching. I left the forest then and never went back. But sometimes, when I'm in the woods anywhere, I look for ravens with white patches on their wings. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear the trees bend a little as I pass, like they're nodding to an old friend, or maybe keeping a promise of their own. The end. I wasn't supposed to be alone that summer. The thing about death is how it leaves so many plans unfinished. Dad and I were going to spend 3 months at this cabin in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, studying the weird things happening to the wildlife. He was the real scientist. I just had a fresh biology degree and too much grief to stay home. When the heart attack took him in April, I almost cancelled everything. But something in his final notes kept pulling at me. Something's wrong with those lakes, Maddie. We need to find out what. So here I was, unpacking my old Jeep at a cabin that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. The wooden structure sat on a narrow strip of land between 2 lakes that couldn't have been more different. To the east was a beautiful blue lake, sparkling in the June sunshine, with fish jumping and birds diving for them. To the west, separated by just 100 yards of land, was what I could only describe as a dark lake. Not just shaded by trees, the water itself seemed to swallow light. No birds circled it, no fish broke its surface. My research equipment looked pathetically small as I carried it inside. This was supposed to be a proper scientific expedition, Dad's last big project before retirement. Now it was just me, trying to understand why 2 lakes so close together could be so completely different. The cabin smelled like old wood and something else I couldn't name. Not quite mold, more like how the air feels before a storm. The previous scientist had left suddenly, according to the university. Their equipment was still in the corner, covered in dust. I was arranging my water testing kits when a truck rumbled up the dirt road. An older man with a grey beard and a flannel shirt that had seen better days climbed out, carrying boxes of supplies. "You must be Werner's daughter," he called as I stepped onto the porch. "I'm Gregory Finnegan, run the bait shop down at the crossroads." "Madeline," I said, taking the heavy box he handed me. "Thanks for bringing these up." He nodded, eyes darting between me and the lakes on either side. "Your dad ordered these supplies months ago. Sorry about what happened to him." "Thanks," I said, the word feeling as hollow as it always did. Gregory helped me bring everything inside, moving with the careful precision of someone used to watching their step. As he placed the last box on the kitchen counter, he paused, looking out the window at the darkening sky. "You planning on staying through the summer?" he asked, voice casual in a way that felt forced. "That's the plan. 3 months of research. Should be enough to figure out why these lakes are so different." Gregory's weathered face tightened. "Word of advice? Don't cross between the lakes after dark. Use the long path around if you need to go from one to the other." I laughed, then stopped when his expression didn't change. "Is there dangerous wildlife or something?" "Something," he agreed, not elaborating. "Your dad knew about the rules. Figured he'd have told you." There were a lot of things Dad hadn't told me, apparently. After Gregory left, I spent the evening setting up my equipment. The cabin was bigger than it looked from outside, with a main room that faced both lakes through opposite windows. When night fell, I noticed something odd. Someone had installed an elaborate array of mirrors on the walls and ceiling, positioned in a way that let you see both lakes simultaneously from almost anywhere in the room. Why would anyone need that? I slept poorly that first night, dreaming of dark water rising into impossible shapes. By the 3rd day, I'd established my research routine. Mornings were for the Blue Lake, taking water samples, cataloging fish species, and recording temperature. At various depths, afternoons were for the Dark Lake, which was quickly becoming an unsettling puzzle. The water was cold, exactly 33 degrees Fahrenheit at every depth I measured. Not frozen, but impossibly consistent, regardless of where I took the reading. Nothing lived in it, as far as I could tell. No fish, no algae, no microscopic organisms in my samples. Just cold, dark water that seemed to drink in light without reflecting it. On the 4th day, I noticed the ripples. I was standing on the narrow beach between the 2 lakes, preparing to take my afternoon samples, when both bodies of water began forming identical, perfectly symmetrical ripples. They moved outward from the center of each lake in precise circles, like someone had dropped giant stones in both lakes at exactly the same moment. But there was nothing there. No cause I could see. The ripples continued for exactly 3 minutes. I timed it, then stopped simultaneously. The water became still again, as if nothing had happened. That night, I tore up the floorboards in what had been the previous researcher's bedroom. I'd noticed they were loose, and something told me to look there. Beneath them, wrapped in plastic, was a stack of notebooks. The previous scientist's research journal. The first entries were normal enough. Water temperatures, species counts, mineral analyses. But as I flipped through the pages, the neat handwriting grew increasingly erratic. Entire sections were crossed out and rewritten. Diagrams of something long and multi-limbed appeared in the margins. The final entry, dated almost exactly a year before I arrived, simply read, "It's using the lakes as transit. Coming through one, going out the other. God help us if it ever stays." I closed the journal, my heart racing. Outside, through the strategically placed mirrors, I could see both lakes at once. The blue one reflected the moon. The dark one reflected nothing at all. In the morning, I found tracks in the mud. They started at the edge of the dark lake and ended at the blue one. Wide, deep depressions with a strange pattern. Not animal tracks exactly. More like something heavy had dragged itself across the narrow strip of land, leaving marks that resembled elongated handprints mixed with what might have been paw impressions. I took photos and measurements. Whatever made them had a stride pattern, matching no species I knew. I was still studying the tracks when Gregory's truck pulled up for his weekly delivery. "Found something interesting?" he asked, not sounding curious at all. I straightened up. "What made these, Gregory?" He looked at the tracks, then at the dark lake, then back to me. "Local folks call it the Long Man," he finally said. "Sort of like those Dogman stories, but different. It needs water to cross between places." "Places? Our world and somewhere else," he said simply. "You notice the mirrors inside? Previous fellow put those up so he could watch both lakes without having to turn his back on either one." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the morning air. "The Long Man doesn't like being seen directly," Gregory continued, as if discussing the weather. "But he can't sneak up if you're watching his reflection." I wanted to laugh, to tell him this was just local superstition. But the tracks were real. The journal entries were real. And the strange ripples had definitely been real. "How long has it been happening?" I asked instead. "Long as anyone remembers," Gregory said. "Gets stronger every 7 years. Your dad figured that out from the historical data. That's why he was coming this summer." He looked at me differently now. "This is year 7 of the cycle, Miss Werner." Back in the cabin, I tried to focus on my actual research. But I kept coming. Back to what Gregory had said, what the journal had shown. I climbed up to the cabin's small attic space and found a hatch that opened to a tiny roof platform, clearly built as an observation point. From there, I could see both lakes perfectly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The fish in the blue lake were swimming in patterns, not natural schooling behavior. They were moving in perfect geometric shapes, creating symbols that rearranged themselves even as I watched. Circles became triangles, became shapes I had no name for. As the sun began to set, I scrambled down from the roof, suddenly afraid to be outside. Back in the cabin, surrounded by mirrors showing me both lakes at once, I began to understand why. My father had been so interested in this place. Something was very wrong here. And I had a feeling I'd find out what when the clock struck 3:17 a.m. I woke with a start, heart pounding, as I fumbled for my phone. The screen read 3:16 a.m. 1 minute later, it started. Splash, splash, splash. The sound came in a perfect rhythm, like a clock ticking. I lay frozen in bed, counting the seconds between each splash. Exactly 5 seconds every time. I wanted to look outside, but Gregory's warning echoed in my head. Don't cross between the lakes after dark. Did looking count as crossing? I didn't want to find out. Instead, I reached for the motion-activated camera I'd set up by the window. If something was out there making those splashes, I'd catch it on video. The splashing continued for exactly 7 minutes before stopping as suddenly as it had begun. Then silence so deep, it felt like a physical pressure against my ears. When morning came, I checked the camera with shaky hands. The video showed the strip of land between the lakes, dimly lit by moonlight. Nothing moved across it. Nothing disturbed. The water, but the audio captured the splashing perfectly, along with a deep, rumbling sound that made my skin crawl when I played it back. It was like the growl of an animal mixed with the hum of power lines, but much lower. When I played it through my research equipment's sound analyzer, parts of it registered as subsonic, too low for human ears to hear properly. No wonder it made me feel sick to my stomach. Later that morning, I hiked around both lakes trying to understand their layout better. That's when I found the offerings. They were small piles placed at specific points along both shorelines, carefully arranged stones with small objects placed on top. A child's toy truck, a wedding ring, a lock of hair tied with ribbon, old coins. Each offering was different, but they all faced the water. I was photographing one when Gregory's truck appeared on the dirt road. He didn't look surprised to find me there. People still making offerings? I asked, nodding toward the pile. He sighed. Some traditions are hard to break, especially when they work. Work for what? Keeping the long man on his side of the crossing. Gregory kicked at the dirt. Look, there's someone you should meet, my mother. She's been here longer than anyone. I followed him to his truck and we drove in silence to a small house at the edge of town. The home was neat but old, with faded curtains and a porch swing that creaked in the light breeze. Gregory's mother was a tiny woman with hands gnarled like tree roots and eyes that missed nothing. She introduced herself as Esther and offered me tea that smelled of pine needles. You're living in the research cabin, she said. Not a question. I am. I'm studying the ecological differences between the lakes. Esther exchanged a look with Gregory. My husband was taken in 1954, she said. Bluntly, he thought the old ways were nonsense, kicked over one of the offering sites while hunting. My tea suddenly tasted bitter. What do you mean, taken? The long man got him. Gregory was just a baby then. She pulled an old photo album from a shelf and opened it to a faded picture of a young couple. That was our last picture together. 3 days later, I found his boots at the edge of the dark lake. Just the boots, placed neatly side by side, nothing else. I stared at the happy couple in the photo. I'm sorry. The long man doesn't take many these days, she continued, as if discussing something ordinary like the weather. Not since the community started supporting the research cabin. Having someone watching, she pointed at me. It helps. On the drive back, Gregory finally explained what his mother had only hinted at. The university thinks they picked that spot for research because of the unusual ecosystem, he said, hands tight on the steering wheel. The truth is, the town council worked with the landowners to build it there, right on the narrowest point between lakes. Why? I asked, though I was starting to guess. Early warning system, he said simply. Scientists notice things, keep records, and they're usually there when no one else is around, when something happens. A chill ran through me despite the warm June day. So I'm what? Bait? Gregory winced. More like a sentinel. The community protects you. Those offerings you saw, they're part of it. Part of what? Keeping the long man from crossing over completely. We pulled up to the cabin and he shut off the engine. Your father figured most of this out, you know. That's why he was coming back. He found the pattern. Back in the cabin, I pored over Dad's research notes and the journals from the previous scientist. Comparing them with historical weather data and wildlife migration reports, a pattern emerged. Every 7 years, animals fled from both lakes. Fish, birds, even insects, all gone within a matter of days, always in the same month, always during the same 3-day window. We were 2 weeks away from the next window. That night, I noticed something I'd overlooked before. Carved into the cabin's main support beams were small symbols, spirals and lines that matched some of the patterns I'd seen the fish forming in the blue lake. Running my fingers over them, I realized they weren't just decorative. The entire cabin had been built as some kind of barrier. I pulled up the loose floorboard again and dug deeper. Beneath the previous researchers' journals was a folder of yellowed newspaper clippings, missing persons reports dating back to the 1800s, all from the area around the lakes, all during the 7-year cycle. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay awake, watching the lakes through the mirrors. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the splashing started again, but this time I was ready. I'd set up cameras on both lakes and rigged a system to alert me on my phone if anything larger than a bread box moved across the land between them. The alert remained silent, but the splashing continued. 7 minutes, just like before. The next day, I found more tracks, fresh ones, leading from the dark lake to the blue one and back again. Whatever made them was getting bolder. Or maybe stronger. I called Gregory. "It's happening every night now," I told him when he arrived. Exactly 3:17 a.m., 7 minutes of splashing. He nodded grimly. "Full moon's coming." What happens then? Instead of answering, he handed me a bag of salt and a jar of something that looked like rust mixed with herbs. "Put these on your windowsills and doorway," he said, "and whatever you do, don't answer if something calls your name tonight." "Gregory, promise me, Madeline." Something in his voice made me nod. "I promise." He helped me place trail cameras at strategic points between the lakes, then showed me markings carved into trees I hadn't noticed before. Symbols that looked ancient, spirals, crosses, and more complex designs I couldn't name. "These mark safe paths," he explained. "Stay on them if you're out after dark." That night was the full moon. I watched from the cabin's observation platform. As it rose high and bright over both lakes, the blue lake glittered like silver. The dark lake remained a perfect void in the landscape. Then, at midnight, both lakes began to change. It started slowly, just a ripple in the center of each. Then the water began to rise, not like waves, but like solid columns reaching upward. Higher and higher they climbed, defying gravity and everything I knew about physics. I grabbed my camera with shaking hands, hardly believing what I was seeing. 2 perfect columns of water, one crystal blue, one pitch black, rising 30 feet into the air. At their peak, they bent toward each other, stretching across the gap of land between the lakes. For one terrible moment, they touched, black water meeting blue in the moonlight. Then both collapsed, sending massive waves crashing against the shores. I nearly fell climbing down from the platform, my heart hammering in my chest. Inside the cabin, I pulled up the camera feeds, rewinding to capture what had just happened, but the screens showed nothing. Just still lakes and empty land. Then my research equipment began to spark and smoke. The data storage unit whirred too, life on its own, downloading files I'd never created, depth soundings from locations I'd never visited, audio recordings in languages I'd never heard. When I checked the most recent water samples I'd collected, they had changed. The blue lake water now contained microscopic organisms I'd never seen before, things that shouldn't exist in freshwater, lakes, or maybe anywhere on Earth. The dark lake sample had disappeared completely, leaving behind a perfectly dry test tube that was somehow freezing to the touch. I was no longer pretending this was normal scientific research. Something impossible was happening here, and according to Gregory, the community had placed me right in the middle of it. Sleep was out of the question. I spent the night reading every scrap of information left by previous researchers, trying to understand what I was dealing with. What was the Long Man? Why did it need to cross between lakes? And most importantly, what happened during the 3-day window Gregory had mentioned? As dawn broke, I made a discovery that sent ice through my veins. The cabin's foundation wasn't just built on the narrowest point between lakes. It was built with materials designed to repel something, salt mixed into the concrete, iron nails arranged in patterns, symbols carved into every support beam. I wasn't just a sentinel. I was living in a fortress built to keep something out, or maybe to keep it from crossing. Morning brought no relief from the night's discoveries. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, watching the peaceful-looking lakes and wondering how something so normal could hide something so wrong. My phone rang. "Gregory, you need to come to the town library," he said without a greeting. "Found something you should see." An hour later, I was hunched over a table covered with old maps and tribal records. The librarian, a quiet woman with knowing eyes, had pulled them without asking questions. "These are from the original survey of the area," Gregory explained, pointing to yellowish papers. "Notice anything?" I studied them carefully. The maps showed the region before settlers arrived. Where the 2 lakes now sat, native tribes had drawn a single symbol, a spiral with a line through it. Written beside it in faded ink was a warning: "Thin place. Do not dwell." They avoided it completely, Gregory said. No settlements, no hunting grounds, nothing for miles around. "What's a thin place?" I asked. "Where the barrier between our world and others gets weak," the librarian answered, making me jump. I hadn't realized she was listening. "Places where things can slip through," I turned back to the maps, but there was just one marked area. "Now there are 2 lakes." Gregory nodded grimly. "The separation happened later. Something split what was once a single thin place into 2 points of access." Back at the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not by someone, but by something. I set up more cameras and motion sensors, telling myself it was for research. That afternoon, dark clouds rolled in quickly, bringing sudden rain that hammered against the roof. The weather forecast had predicted sunshine all week. As lightning cracked across the sky, the power went out. I lit candles and pressed my face against the window, watching raindrops pound the dark lake's surface. Except they weren't hitting one spot. Right in the center, there was a perfect circle where no rain fell at all. I grabbed binoculars for a closer look. The rain wasn't just missing that spot, it was being pushed away, as if something massive was displacing the water from beneath. Something was moving under the surface. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the lake for a split second. In that brief moment I saw it, a huge, dark shape moving just below the surface. Not a fish, not anything I recognized. It was too big, too wrong. The storm lasted until sunset, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. As darkness fell, I checked every lock, every window. The salt and herbs Gregory had given me were still in place. I wasn't taking any chances. Sleep came in fits and starts. Every noise made me bolt upright, heart racing. At 3:16 a.m., I woke on my own, knowing what was coming. 1 minute later, the splashing started, but this time it was closer, right outside. The cabin. Against my better judgment, I peered through the window, using one of the mirrors. What I saw made my blood freeze. Standing halfway out of the dark lake was a figure. Not human, not animal. Its head was canine, like a wolf but larger, with too many teeth showing in a mouth that seemed to split its face. Below the head was a humanoid torso, impossibly thin and elongated. But where there should have been 2 arms and legs, there were too many limbs, all jointed in the wrong places, supporting its weight on the water's surface as if it were solid ground. The Long Man. The Dog Man. It was real. As if sensing my gaze, it turned toward the cabin, not toward the window, toward the mirror I was using to watch it. It knew exactly where I was looking from. Then it spoke. "Charlotte," it said, using a woman's voice that echoed across the water. "Elizabeth, Thomas, Jason." It paused. "Madeline, names. The names of previous cabin occupants, and mine. Permission to cross?" it asked, its voice now a blend of all the names it had spoken, creating a horrible chorus. Stumbled back from the window, knocking over a chair in my panic. The thing outside made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a growl. "I can wait," the blended voices said. "I have waited before." Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When the first light broke, I rushed outside to check the shore. Deep impressions, marked where something heavy had stood at the lake's edge. The grass was dead where each footprint, or whatever it was, had landed. I called Gregory with shaking hands, describing what I'd seen. "It's showing itself," he said, his voice tight with worry. "That's not good. It usually stays hidden longer." "It knew my name," I whispered. "It asked for permission to cross." "Don't give it," Gregory said quickly. "Whatever you do, it can't cross between lakes without a human invitation. That's the one rule it can't break." An hour later, Gregory arrived, with 5 other townspeople I hadn't met before. They carried bags of salt, iron tools, and bundles of herbs. Without asking permission, they formed a circle around the cabin, placing objects at specific points. "Protection circle," Gregory explained. "Strongest we can make it." A tall woman with grey-streaked hair introduced herself as the town doctor. "We need to see your footage," she said. "Whatever you recorded last night." I pulled up the video on my laptop. Like before, the cameras had captured nothing visible, just empty shoreline. But in certain frames there were distortions in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. And the audio clearly caught that horrible, multi-voiced speech. "It's phasing in," the doctor said, "becoming more solid with each appearance." "What exactly is it?" I demanded. "You all know more than you're telling me." The townspeople exchanged glances. Finally, Gregory sighed. "It's not from here," he said simply. "Not from anywhere on Earth. The native people knew about it centuries ago. It comes through the dark lake, uses the blue lake to leave, or sometimes the other way around." "Like a transit system," I whispered, remembering the previous researchers' notes. "Exactly," said an older man I hadn't met before. "But every 7 years the transit window widens. It can stay longer, become more solid, and eventually cross. Over completely," Gregory finished, "if someone gives it permission." That afternoon I used the cabin's small boat to take depth measurements of the dark lake. Every reading after 127 feet simply disappeared. The equipment registered nothing at all, as if the bottom dropped away into nothing. I was noting this in my journal when something bumped the boat from below. Not hard, almost. Curious. I froze, remembering what I'd seen the night before. The thing was under me right now, just feet away through the thin hull of the aluminum boat. I rowed back to shore as calmly as I could, feeling eyes on me the entire way. That night, Gregory insisted on staying in his truck outside the cabin. "Just in case," he said, not explaining further. I was grateful for his presence as I went through the journals again, this time focusing on the missing researchers' final entries. They'd become increasingly paranoid, describing voices that called from the water using familiar tones. The last entry described seeing a familiar face in the dark lake, the researcher's recently deceased mother, calling for help. A cold realization hit me. The thing, the dogman, was adaptable. It learned. It found weaknesses and exploited them. Just after midnight, I heard Gregory shouting outside. I ran to the window to see him stumbling toward the dark lake, flashlight beam dancing wildly. "Dad!" he was yelling. "Hold on, I'm coming." My blood ran cold. Gregory's father, taken in 1954, according to Esther's story. It was happening again. I sprinted outside, tackling Gregory just yards from the water's edge. He fought against me with surprising strength. "Let me go," he growled. "My father's drowning. Can't you hear him?" I couldn't hear anything except the wind and Gregory's panicked breathing. The dogman was targeting him specifically, using his deepest pain. "It's not real," I said, holding on tight. "Gregory, your father has been gone for over 60 years. Remember, Esther told me, something changed in his eyes. Confusion, then clarity." He stopped struggling. "It was so real," he whispered. "I heard him calling." We retreated to the cabin, where Gregory explained more about the dogman's abilities. "It reaches into your mind," he said, hands shaking around a mug of coffee. "Finds what hurts most, what you can't say no to." "Has it tried this with you before?" He nodded slowly. "Gets stronger every cycle, and this is the worst part of the cycle, just before the transit window. 3 days when the lakes align with," he hesitated, "that with certain stars creates a perfect crossing point." "When does this window start?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Tomorrow night." Sleep was impossible after that. I paced the cabin, checking mirrors and windows compulsively. Gregory dozed in a chair by the door, his hunting rifle across his lap. Just before dawn, my phone pinged with an alert from the motion sensors. Something was moving between the lakes. In the grey morning light, we found no footprints, no physical evidence. But the cameras had captured something just for a few frames. The footage showed a distortion that, when enhanced, looked almost like a tall, thin figure with a canine head. More solid than before. More real. "It didn't wait for night," Gregory said, his face ashen. "It's getting stronger." That's when I realized the previous researcher hadn't left at all. "Gregory," I said slowly, "what happened to Charlotte, the last scientist?" His silence told me everything. "She gave it permission, didn't she? By accident or trick?" He nodded once. "We found her notebooks, nothing else." The dogman hadn't just studied previous occupants, it had taken them, absorbed them somehow. That's how it knew their names, their voices. And now it knew mine. As the sun rose fully, I made a decision. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't hide. If this thing had taken my predecessor, if it was planning to use the transit window to cross over permanently, I needed to understand it. Completely. Even if that meant facing it directly. With Gregory's reluctant help, I spent the day preparing. We reinforced the protective circle around the cabin and checked every mirror to ensure both lakes were visible from anywhere inside. Then we waited for night to fall and the transit window to open. "Your father knew what he was getting into," Gregory said suddenly as the first stars appeared. "He wanted to stop it. He had a plan." I looked at him sharply. "What plan?" "Didn't say exactly. Just that he'd found its weakness." Gregory hesitated. "Madeline, there's something else you should know. Your father wasn't the first Werner to study these lakes." My heart skipped. "What?" "Your grandfather was here in 1970. Another 7-year cycle." I stared at him, pieces falling into place. Dad's determination to come here, his certainty that something was wrong. The family connection I hadn't known about. Outside, both lakes began to glow faintly as darkness settled. The transit window was opening, and something was stirring in the dark water, preparing to cross. Night fell completely, bringing a strange stillness. No crickets chirped, no frogs called from the lake shores. Even the wind had died, leaving both lakes as smooth as glass. "First sign," Gregory murmured, loading his shotgun. "Animals always know." I checked my watch. 9:17 p.m., 6 hours until the dogman's usual appearance time. But something told me it wouldn't wait that long tonight. Not with the transit window opening. Gregory's phone rang, making us both jump. After a brief conversation, he turned to me with worry in his eyes. That was Esther. "The birds are acting strange in town." "Strange how?" "Flying in perfect formations, making shapes in the sky." He swallowed hard. "Writing words." A chill ran through me. "What words?" "Coming and home." over and over. Over the next hour, reports came in from around the area. Fish were beaching themselves on both lake shores. Deer were walking in circles around the cabin property. A flock of crows had arranged themselves in a perfect circle on Main Street, all facing toward our location. The Dogman wasn't just affecting water anymore. It was controlling living things. At midnight, I went outside to check the protection circle. The salt lines remained unbroken, the iron stakes firmly planted. But something was wrong with the Blue Lake. Its usual clarity was gone, replaced by a milky cloudiness. When I took a sample, the water smelled wrong, like rotten eggs mixed with something metallic. Under my portable microscope, I saw why. The lake was dying. Every organism in the sample was dead or dying, poisoned by something I couldn't identify. "It's breaking the balance," Gregory said when I showed him. "The Blue Lake has always been the counter to the Dark One. Life against whatever that other thing is. Can it do that? Kill an entire lake?" "First time I've seen it," he admitted, "but each cycle it gets stronger, learns new tricks." A splash from outside drew our attention. Not the rhythmic sounds from before. This was deliberate, like someone throwing rocks into water. Through the mirrors, we watched as ripples spread across the dark lake's surface. Then, slowly, figures began to rise from the water. Human-shaped, made entirely of water that somehow held its form outside the lake. Water. People, 5 of them, standing on the shore perfectly still. "What are they?" I whispered. "Don't know," Gregory answered, his voice tight. "New trick." As if hearing us, all 5 water figures turned toward the cabin in perfect unison. Then they began walking, not toward us, but toward town. Gregory was on the phone immediately, warning the others. While he talked, I studied the water people through binoculars. They looked more solid with each step, less like moving water and more like glass, reflective, catching moonlight in ways that made it hard to look directly at them. "When?" Gregory hung up. His face was grim. "Town's preparing. Those things won't make it past the protective boundaries." "What if they do?" He didn't answer. We tracked the water people's progress through the night using calls from townspeople. The figures walked slowly, taking hours to reach the town's edge. When they encountered the first protective barriers, lines of salt and iron like the ones around our cabin, they stopped. Then, one by one, they shifted shape. Their featureless faces took on distinct appearances, becoming perfect copies of me. 5 Madeleines stood at the edge of town, waiting silently. "It's trying to confuse them," Gregory explained. "Make them think you're there, that you've left. The cabin. Why? To break trust. If they think you're helping it somehow." The implications were clear. The town's protection depended on unity, on trust. The Dogman was trying to fracture that. Dawn came with no further incidents. The water Madeleines had vanished sometime before sunrise, leaving only damp spots on the ground. But the damage was done. Several townspeople called Gregory, questioning whether I could be trusted. We were losing allies just when we needed them most. By mid-morning, both lakes had changed dramatically. The Blue Lake was now completely cloudy, its surface covered with dead fish and plants. The Dark Lake seemed darker than ever, absorbing light like a black hole. I was examining water samples when Gregory burst into the cabin. "You need to see this," he said, leading me to the porch. In the narrow strip of land between the lakes, new tracks had appeared. But these weren't like the others. These were burning, smoking footprints that sizzled in the damp ground, each one shaped like an elongated handprint with too many fingers. "It's testing the barrier between lakes," Gregory said, "seeing how solid it can become." As we watched, another footprint appeared out of nowhere, burning itself into the ground with a hiss of steam. Then another, and another, like something invisible was walking slowly toward the cabin. We retreated inside, checking that all protections were still in place. The footprints stopped at the edge of the salt circle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the dogman was watching us, testing our defenses. Tonight's the first night of the transit window, Gregory reminded me. It'll be strongest after midnight. I nodded, trying to hide my fear. We need more help. Gregory made calls, and by sunset, a dozen townspeople had gathered at the cabin. They brought more protective materials, salt, iron, bundles of herbs. Some wore strange tattoos on their arms and hands, symbols that matched the ones carved into the cabin's beams. Family marks, explained an older man named Frank. Been in my family 5 generations. Protect against possession. Gregory rolled. Up his sleeve, showing similar tattoos, running from his wrist to his shoulder. Most of us have them. Those who've lived here long enough to know. I suddenly felt vulnerable, unmarked and unprotected against whatever was coming. As darkness fell, the group formed a circle around the property. Each person held an iron tool, axes, shovels, old farming implements, planted firmly in the ground. Before them, Gregory explained they would perform a ritual to strengthen the barriers between the lakes. What do I need to do? I asked. Watch the mirrors, he said grimly. Tell us if you see it coming, and whatever happens, do not go outside. After we start, the ritual began at sunset. The people stood in their circle, chanting words in a language I didn't recognize. Each cut their palm with a small knife, letting blood drip onto the iron tools before them. Blood sacrifice, Gregory had explained earlier. Just a drop from each person. Binds the protection to the land. I watched from inside, monitoring both. Lakes through the mirrors. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then, just as the full darkness settled in, both lakes began to change. The surfaces bubbled and steamed, though the temperature outside was mild. The dark lake seemed to rise slightly, its level increasing inch by inch. The blue lake, now a sickly grey color, did the opposite, its level dropping as if draining away. Through the mirrors, I saw something moving in the dark water, not on the surface, but deep below, massive shadows shifting and stretching. The dogman wasn't alone. There were others, many others. Outside, the chanting grew louder as the townspeople sensed the change. Their circle glowed faintly in the darkness, a thin line of blue light connecting each person to the next. Then I heard it, that multi-voiced call from the water. "Madeline," it said, using what sounded like my father's voice. "Help me, Maddie. I'm trapped here." My heart clenched. Even knowing it was a trick, hearing Dad's voice hurt in ways I wasn't prepared for. "Madeline," the voice continued, now matching the exact tone Dad used when I was scared as a child. "I found a way back, but I need your help. Just come to the shore, just for a moment." My feet moved toward the door before I could stop myself. Gregory's warning echoed in my head, "Do not go outside," but Dad's voice pulled at me like a physical force. I pressed my hands against the door, fighting the urge to open it. Outside, the chanting had reached a fever pitch. The blue glow around the circle pulsed like a heartbeat. "They're keeping me from you," Dad's voice said, now angry. "They've always known how to bring people back. They just never told you. They let me die, Maddie." Tears streamed down my face as I slid to the floor, back against the door. It wasn't real. It wasn't Dad. But it knew exactly what would break me. Suddenly, a scream cut through the night. Not from the lake, from the circle. I rushed to the window and saw Gregory on his knees, one of the water Madelines standing over him. It had somehow breached the circle and had its liquid hands on Gregory's face. Without thinking, I grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace and ran outside. The protection circle's glow flickered as I crossed it. The water Madeline turned to me, its face, my face, splitting into a terrible smile that went too far up its cheeks. It spoke with the dogman's multiple voices. "Invitation," it asked, hands still gripping Gregory's face. "Let him go," I demanded. The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle. Trade? Him for permission? No deals, I snarled, swinging the poker. The iron passed through the water figure, which rippled but didn't break. Its grip on Gregory tightened, and he gasped in pain. Then I noticed the symbols tattooed across his exposed skin were changing, darkening, spreading like ink in water. The dogman wasn't just attacking him physically, it was possessing him. "Gregory, fight it," I shouted, dropping to my knees beside him. His eyes met mine, filled with pain and fear. "Can't hold it," he gasped. "It's been trying for years, since I was a boy." The water Madeline laughed with that horrible multi-voice. "He's been mine since father went swimming," it said, "just taking what's mine." Understanding hit. Me, Gregory had been partially connected to the dogman since his father was taken. The protective tattoos had kept it at bay until now. The other townspeople tried to help, but more water figures rose from the ground, holding them back. The protection circle was failing. In desperation, I remembered what Gregory had said. The dogman couldn't cross between lakes without permission. But what if permission wasn't the only rule it had to follow? I leaned close to Gregory's ear and whispered, "Show me what it's showing you." His hand grabbed mine in a painful grip. Instantly, my mind exploded with images, impossible landscapes, structures that defied physics, beings that hurt to look at, knowledge that humans weren't meant to have, pouring into my brain like fire. I screamed, but held on. The dogman wanted to share this, wanted someone to know what existed beyond our reality. That was its weakness, pride, the need to be witnessed. "Yes," I gasped through the pain. "I see it. I see you. I know what you are now." The water Madeline paused, its grip on Gregory loosening slightly. It seemed confused by my reaction. "But do you know what I am?" I asked, fighting through the mental assault. Before it could respond, I plunged the iron poker into the ground between us, breaking the connection. Gregory collapsed, the dark spread of possession receding from his skin. The water figure hissed and retreated, rejoining the dark lake with a splash. The ritual circle had been broken, but the attack stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The other water figures dissolved, leaving the townspeople shaken but alive. Gregory was unconscious but breathing. The town doctor examined his tattoos, which were now faded but intact. "He'll live," she said, "but the possession went deep. He's connected to it now more than ever." As they carried Gregory to a truck to take him to safety, he briefly regained consciousness. His eyes found mine, filled with new knowledge. "It was human once," he whispered. "Long ago. It found something at the bottom of the dark lake. Changed it." Then his eyes rolled back, and he was out again. Back in the cabin, I pored over everything I had learned. The dogman had been human. It had been transformed by something it discovered. And now it wanted to come through completely, to bring that knowledge, that transformation to our world. I couldn't let that happen. Outside, the dark lake bubbled and churned as midnight approached. The second night of the transit window was beginning, and without Gregory or the protection circle, I was on my own, but I had seen inside the dogman's mind. And knowledge, even terrible knowledge, was power. I just hoped I could use it before the dogman used me. I spent the night alternating between watching the lakes through mirrors and studying everything I had, research notes, journals, and the memories of what I'd seen in the dogman's mind. By dawn, my eyes burned and my head throbbed, but I had the beginnings of a plan. The dogman was growing stronger with each appearance. The recordings from my equipment showed it. Each time it manifested, it became more solid, more present in our reality. If it crossed completely during the final night of the transit window, there would be no sending it back. I needed to know exactly how it manifested. Setting aside my fear, I connected my research equipment to every camera and sensor I had, creating a makeshift monitoring system. If the dogman had a weakness, the data would show it. The phone rang around noon. Esther, Gregory's mother. "He's awake," she said without preamble. "Asking for you." At the small town clinic, I found Gregory pale but alert, the faded tattoos on, his skin now barely visible. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water. "You saw it," he said, "in my head. What it showed me." I nodded, taking the chair beside his bed. "It was human once. Something changed it." "Not something," Gregory corrected. "Someone. It made a deal, hundreds of years ago. With what lives at the bottom of the dark lake." He closed his eyes briefly. "It wants to bring that thing through. That's why it needs to cross between lakes." "What is it?" I asked. "What's at the bottom? I don't have words." His eyes were haunted. "But the Dogman is just the messenger, the scout. If it crosses permanently, the other can follow." A chill ran down my spine. "How do we stop it?" "Your father had a theory." Gregory's voice strengthened. "The Dogman can control water, shape it, move between lakes, but water has rules, chemistry, physics. Your dad thought that might be its weakness." I leaned forward. "What kind of weakness?" "It needs the water's specific molecular structure to maintain its form. Change that structure." "And we change the Dogman," I finished, mind racing. The plan forming in my head suddenly seemed possible. Back at the cabin, I dug through Dad's original research notes with new purpose. There it was, buried in chemical formulas and molecular diagrams. Dad had been developing a compound to alter water's surface tension and molecular bonding. Not to kill the Dogman, but to trap it, to make it impossible for it to maintain physical form. I had most of the necessary chemicals in my research supplies. The rest I could find in town. By sunset, I had created enough of the compound to treat a small section of shoreline. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to test the theory. As darkness fell on the final night of the transit window, both lakes began to change. The blue lake, now almost completely gray and lifeless, started to vibrate, sending ripples outward. The dark lake rose slightly, its surface bulging upward as if pushed from below. I waited by the window, compound ready in spray bottles. The cabin felt too quiet without Gregory or the townspeople. Some had offered to come back to rebuild the protection circle, but I'd refused. After what happened to Gregory, I couldn't risk more people getting hurt. This was between me and the Dogman. Now, at exactly midnight, both lakes erupted. Not in splashes or waves, but in perfect vertical columns of water rising 30 feet into the air. Just like the first night of the transit window, but bigger, more stable. The columns began to bend toward each other, stretching across the strip of land between the lakes, forming a bridge of water. Beneath that bridge, standing on the shore of the dark lake, was the Dogman. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. Its head was canine, a wolf's head but larger, with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. Its body was impossibly tall and thin, with multiple jointed limbs that moved in smooth coordination. It looked almost elegant in a terrifying way, like something from a nightmare trying to be beautiful. It began to walk forward, not across the land, but up into the water bridge, climbing as if ascending stairs. This was the crossing. This was what everyone had feared. I grabbed the bottles of compound and ran outside. The air felt thick, hard to move through. The Dogman paused halfway across its water bridge, turning its massive head toward me. "Madeline Werner," it said in multiple voices, including my father's. "You've come to witness." "Good. I've come to stop you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The Dogman made a sound that might have been laughter. "You cannot. This is the final crossing, the 7th times 7th. I will become permanent in your world." "Why?" I demanded, stalling while I moved closer to the water bridge's endpoint. "Why here? Why now?" "To open the way," it said simply. "My master waits, has waited for centuries. You saw it, felt it, the knowledge beyond your small reality. And if I just let you cross, what happens then?" The Dogman tilted its head, an almost human gesture. Then I show you everything, the truth beyond your science, the spaces between worlds. It extended one long, jointed limb toward me. Come with me. Your father wanted to know. That's why he studied us. But he died before learning the truth. My heart ached at the mention of Dad, but I stood firm. My father wanted to stop you. He wanted knowledge, the dogman countered. As do you. I can give it. It was almost at the end of the water bridge now, where it would touch down on the shore of the blue lake. Once it made that connection, the crossing would be complete. I've seen what your knowledge did to you, I said. What it's doing to Gregory. The dogman paused. The Guardian, he is compatible. His father was too. Some humans are more suited to the crossing than others. Compatible for what? To host, it said simply. I need a form when my master comes through. The Guardians will do nicely. Horror washed through me as I understood. The dogman wasn't just crossing over. It was planning to fully possess Gregory. To use him as a permanent vessel. Not happening, I said, uncapping the first bottle of compound. The dogman surged forward suddenly, multiple limbs propelling it down the water bridge with frightening speed. I sprayed the compound at the end of the bridge where it would touch down. Nothing happened. The dogman laughed again, that terrible multi-voice sound. Water is my domain, Madeline Werner. Your chemicals cannot harm me, but I wasn't aiming for the dogman itself. I was targeting the water bridge, and the compound was working. Where the spray hit, the water was changing, becoming cloudy and sluggish. The dogman noticed too late. As it reached the treated section, the water began to crystallize, turning to a strange, viscous ice that wasn't quite solid, wasn't quite liquid. The dogman's limbs stuck in the changing substance, slowing its descent. More, I yelled to myself, spraying frantically at the base of the bridge. The dogman roared, the sound vibrating through my bones. It twisted its body, trying to free itself from the changing water, but the more it struggled, the more it became entangled. The water columns began to shudder, losing their perfect form as the chemical reaction spread. The bridge between them trembled, sections crystallizing while others remained fluid. I backed away, watching as the dogman thrashed, its body stretching impossibly as it tried to free itself. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, both water columns shattered, collapsing back into the lakes. For one moment, the dogman hung suspended in mid-air, caught between worlds. Then it fell, fragments of its form scattering like drops of water. But it wasn't over. The dark lake began to boil violently. The dogman might be disrupted, but it wasn't defeated, and the transit window was still open. I ran back to the cabin for the rest of the compound. When I returned, something new was emerging from the dark lake, not the dogman, but water copies of people, dozens of them. Some I recognized from town, others must have been victims from previous cycles, people taken over the years. They walked toward me in unison, their water faces blank and expressionless. Behind them, the dark lake continued to churn, something massive moving beneath the surface. This was Plan B. If the dogman couldn't cross, it would send these copies to overwhelm me, to get me to give permission another way. I had almost used all the compound on the water bridge. Only one bottle remained, not enough for all these figures. Backing up toward the cabin, I tried to think of another solution. Then headlights cut through the darkness as a truck roared up the dirt road. Gregory's truck. He stumbled out, still pale and weak, but his eyes clear and determined. Behind him came others. Esther, the town doctor, several people I recognized from the protection circle. Told you, Gregory called hoarsely. You need guardians. The water people shifted direction, moving toward this new threat. Gregory and the others formed a line, each holding iron tools and containers of salt. It wouldn't stop the copies for long, but it gave me time to think. Gregory had said the dogman needed water's specific molecular structure. These copies were made of water from the dark lake. If I could poison that source, I ran toward the dark lake, dodging between water people who reached for me with dripping hands. Behind me, Gregory and the others used iron and salt to disrupt any copies that came too close, the figures dissolving temporarily before reforming. At the lake's edge, I hesitated. The water was black as oil, and something moved beneath its surface. Something much larger than the dogman. No time for fear. I emptied the last bottle of compound directly into the dark lake. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lake began to change color, clouding from black to gray to a strange crystalline blue. The water people stopped moving, their forms growing rigid. A roar of fury came from everywhere at once, not just from the lake, but from the ground, the air, the water people themselves. The sound struck me like a physical blow, sending me to my knees. Then the dark lake froze, not with normal ice, but with the same crystalline substance that had trapped the dogman. The entire surface hardened in seconds, trapping whatever moved beneath. The water people shattered, falling to the ground as piles of crystalline dust. For one beautiful moment, I thought we'd won. Then Gregory screamed, his body contorted, limbs bending at impossible angles. His face stretched, features elongating into something canine. The dogman hadn't been destroyed. It had jumped into the one host already connected to it. "No!" I screamed, running toward him. The others backed away in horror as Gregory's body continued to transform. His voice, when he spoke, was a terrible blend of his own and the dogman's multi-voice. "Transit complete," he said, his jaw moving wrong, teeth too sharp. "Master, comes..." The frozen dark lake began to crack, massive fissures spreading across its surface. Whatever was beneath was still coming. Gregory, or what had been Gregory, turned toward the blue lake, clearly intending to complete the crossing. Despite his partial transformation, he needed to reach the other lake to make it permanent. I tackled him, both of us falling hard to the ground. Up close, I could see Gregory was still in there. His eyes flashed between their normal brown and the dogman's reflective silver. "Fight it," I begged. "You've been fighting it all your life. Don't stop now." A flicker of recognition. Gregory's voice, weak but his own. "Ritual. Need blood." Of course. The protection ritual required blood. Sacrifice. I'd looked around desperately for something sharp, finding only rocks and sticks. Behind us, the dark lake's ice continued to crack, something pushing up from below. We were out of time. Taking Gregory's hunting knife from his belt, I made a decision. The historical accounts, Gregory's own tattoos, the ritual I'd witnessed, they all pointed to the same conclusion. Blood sealed the barrier between worlds. I pressed the blade against my left palm and cut deep, ignoring the pain. Blood welled up, bright red in the moonlight. "I am the Guardian now," I said firmly, pressing my bleeding hand against Gregory's forehead. "By blood and choice, I deny you passage. Return to your side. Return to your master. You are not welcome here." Gregory's body convulsed as the dogman fought against my impromptu ritual. But something was happening. The partial transformation was receding, his limbs returning to normal proportions. I continued, making up words that felt right, that felt powerful. "Between the lakes, I stand. Between the worlds, I guard. By my blood, by my will, the way is closed." I pressed my bleeding hand to the ground between us, feeling a strange connection form. To the land, to the lakes, to the thin place between worlds. Gregory collapsed. Fully human again, exhausted but free. From possession, behind us, the dark lake's ice stopped cracking. The pressure from below subsided. The transit window was closing. Esther helped her son to his feet, while the town doctor wrapped my bleeding hand in clean bandages. Together, we watched as both lakes changed once more. The dark lake thawed, but didn't return to its previous state. Instead, it filled with strange lights that moved beneath the surface, creatures or plants unlike anything I'd seen before. Life, but not life as we knew it. The blue lake, which had been dying, became completely still and mirror-like, reflecting the night sky perfectly. When I tested it later, I found it completely sterile. No life, no movement, just perfect reflective. Water. The balance had shifted but remained. The dogman was contained but not destroyed. The master it served was denied passage but still waited, and I understood my new role. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of the cabin, my cabin now, watching the sunset reflect off both lakes. My left hand, scarred from that night, tingled slightly, as it always did when the dark lake was active. Gregory had recovered, the last of his unwanted connection to the dogman severed by my blood ritual. He still brought supplies weekly, but no longer had to be the guardian. That role had passed to me. The protective tattoos on my arms and back were still healing. Exact copies of Gregory's, inked carefully by Esther herself. They would help shield me from possession during the next cycle, 7 years from now. On the table beside me lay a letter from the university, asking about my research findings and offering to send a new scientist to assist me. I would accept the help. Another set of eyes on the lakes was always useful, but I wouldn't tell them everything, not right away. Some knowledge had to be earned. Some truths had to be faced slowly. I touched the largest tattoo, a spiral design over my heart that matched the native symbol for thin place. The dogman would return. Its master would try again. But I would be ready. The lakes were quiet tonight, each holding its secrets. The dark one teemed with impossible life forms that moved just out of sight. The blue one reflected everything perfectly. Like a giant mirror, between them I stood guard, the new guardian of Coldwater Crossing, watching for signs of the long man's return. Behind me, in the cabin, mirrors still showed both lakes simultaneously, never letting me turn my back on either one. You can't be too careful in thin places.